For most of human history, night did not begin with comfort. It began with the slow, quiet loss of warmth. The body would lie down on the ground, and whatever heat it had gathered during the day would begin to fade into the earth. There was nothing to hold it in place, no layer to keep the warmth close. And yet, this was not a rare hardship. It was simply how nights were experienced again and again across thousands of generations. If you notice closely, a small trace of that experience still remains in the moment your body feels slightly cold before sleep, or when you shift without fully waking, searching for warmth that is not quite there. That familiar feeling, so easy to solve now, once had no immediate answer. So what does it mean for a body to rest without warmth? Why did 90% of human history sleep without a blanket? Warmth is often treated as something the body simply has, as if it were a steady condition that continues on its own. But when the day ends and the body becomes still, warmth does not remain unchanged. It begins to move outward, slowly, quietly, in ways that are not always noticed at first. The skin cools before the deeper parts of the body do, and the difference is subtle enough that it rarely wakes a person immediately. Instead, it creates a low, continuous signal that something is shifting. In a modern setting, this signal is quickly resolved. A blanket is pulled closer, and the body settles again. The process ends almost as soon as it begins. But for most of human history, that small correction was not always available. The loss of heat continued, not as a sudden drop, but as a gradual change that unfolded over the course of the night. This does not mean that every night was cold in the same way, or that every place felt equally uncomfortable. Human environments have always varied, and so have the conditions of rest. But across those variations, one pattern remains consistent. The body does not generate enough retained warmth on its own to stay unchanged, without some form of insulation. It responds instead by adjusting in small ways, often without conscious awareness. Muscles contract slightly, posture shifts, and the body seeks positions that reduce the surface exposed to the surrounding air. These movements are not deliberate strategies in the way we might plan them now. They are part of a deeper biological process, one that existed long before any structured approach to comfort. If you notice your own experience, you can still see traces of this pattern. A hand moves closer to the torso, legs draw inward, the back turns away from a cooler surface. These are not decisions that require thought. They are responses that happen before language, before explanation. And they suggest something important. Warmth is not the default state of the body, but something that must be maintained through interaction with the environment. When that interaction changes, even slightly, the body follows. In earlier periods of human existence, this relationship between body and environment would have been constant. Without consistent materials to trap heat, the boundary between the body and the surrounding air remained thin. Heat moved outward through contact with the ground, through the air that passed over the skin, and through the simple passage of time during the night. The body did not stop this movement entirely. It managed it, adjusted to it, and continued resting within it. This is not a story of hardship in a dramatic sense, but of continuity, a long, repeated experience in which sleep and the slow loss of warmth were not separate events, but part of the same process. And over many generations, this process did not disappear. It became familiar, even if it was never entirely comfortable. The absence of something like a blanket does not point to a single cause or a single limitation. It reflects a broader condition in which the tools and materials needed to hold warmth close were not always present, and the body adapted by working within that absence rather than removing it. So, when we think about warmth now, it may seem natural, expected, almost guaranteed, but that expectation is relatively recent. Beneath it, there remains an older pattern, one in which warmth was always in motion, and rest meant allowing the body to settle even as that motion continued. When the body becomes still, the process of losing heat becomes easier to notice, even if it is not fully understood. During the day, movement creates a kind of interruption. Muscles contract, blood flows more actively, and the body produces heat as a result of constant activity. But at night, when movement slows and eventually stops, that steady production decreases. The body does not stop generating heat entirely, but it no longer replaces it at the same rate. This creates a quiet imbalance. Heat continues to leave while less of it is created. The difference is small at first, almost unnoticeable, but over time it becomes more apparent in the way the body responds. A slight tension appears in the shoulders, a subtle tightening in the arms or legs, not strong enough to wake the mind, but enough to signal that something has changed. In modern environments, this moment rarely lasts. A layer of fabric holds the warmth close, and the balance is restored before it can develop further. But if that layer is absent, the process continues without interruption. The skin, being the outer boundary, is the first to feel the change. It does not simply cool in a uniform way. Some areas lose heat faster than others, especially those in direct contact with surfaces or exposed to air movement. The body senses these differences and begins to adjust, not through conscious planning, but through small shifts in position. A shoulder rolls slightly, a leg bends, the body turns just enough to reduce the area exposed. These adjustments do not stop the loss of heat, but they can slow it. Over time, a pattern emerges in which the body alternates between stillness and subtle movement, not fully awake, but not entirely passive either. This pattern suggests that rest, in its earlier forms, may not have been a perfectly stable state. Instead, it may have included these ongoing adjustments as part of the process itself. The idea of lying completely still for hours, unchanged and undisturbed, depends on conditions that reduce the need for such adjustments. Without those conditions, the body remains engaged in maintaining its internal balance, even during sleep. This does not mean that rest was impossible, but that it may have been different in texture, shaped by the environment rather than separated from it. If we look at how the body reacts today when warmth is reduced, we can see a continuation of this older pattern. The instinct to curl inward, to bring the limbs closer to the center, to reduce exposure, all reflect a simple principle: preserving heat by minimizing loss. These responses do not require instruction. They are part of the body's basic organization, and they operate regardless of whether the surrounding conditions are temporary or long-lasting. Across much of human history, these conditions were not something that could be easily changed from one night to the next. Materials that could hold warmth consistently were not always available, and the ability to create a controlled sleeping environment was limited. As a result, the body's adjustments were not occasional responses, but regular features of nightly rest. Over many generations, this repeated experience would have shaped how rest was experienced, not as a perfectly insulated state, but as one that included a constant interaction with the surrounding temperature. The absence of a blanket, in this sense, is not just about a missing object. It reflects a different balance between the body and its environment, where maintaining warmth depended more on internal processes and less on external layers. And within that balance, sleep did not remove the influence of the environment. It unfolded within it, gradually, as the body continued to adjust to the slow, steady movement of heat away from itself. As the night deepens, the body does not simply continue in a straight line toward cold. Instead, it moves through small cycles of adjustment, each one subtle enough that it rarely reaches full awareness. The loss of heat slows in some moments, increases in others, depending on posture, surface, and the surrounding air. What remains constant is not a fixed temperature, but a continuous negotiation between what the body produces and what the environment takes away. In a modern setting, this negotiation is mostly hidden. The presence of a blanket creates a thin, stable layer of air that stays close to the skin, reducing the need for constant adjustment. But when that layer is absent, the boundary between body and environment becomes less defined. Air moves freely across the skin, and the ground beneath becomes part of the same exchange. Warmth is not held in place. It drifts outward, gradually, and the body responds by shifting its position again and again, often without waking. This does not suggest a state of constant discomfort, but rather a different kind of rest, one that includes movement as part of its structure. The body settles, cools, adjusts, and settles again, repeating this pattern over the course of the night. These adjustments are not random. They tend to reduce exposed surface area, bringing the limbs closer to the center, or turning the body away from a cooler direction. Over time, such patterns become familiar, not as learned behaviors in a conscious sense, but as responses that occur before thought. If we observe similar responses today, they often appear in moments when warmth is slightly reduced, not severely, but just enough to be noticed by the body. A person might draw their knees inward, tuck their hands closer, or turn toward a warmer side of the bed. These movements echo a much older pattern, one that does not depend on modern materials. Across much of human history, the ability to maintain a stable, insulated space during sleep was limited. This does not mean that warmth was always absent, or that every environment presented the same conditions. Some regions offered milder nights, others more variation. But the consistent presence of a soft, enclosing layer designed specifically to trap heat was not a universal feature. Instead, warmth was influenced by factors such as the ground surface, nearby shelter, shared body heat, and residual warmth from the day. Within this context, the body did not remain separate from the environment during rest. It stayed connected to it, responding to changes that unfolded slowly through the night. The idea of a fully controlled sleeping environment, where temperature remains steady and the body can remain completely still, is a relatively recent development. Before such conditions became common, rest likely included these small, repeated interactions with the surrounding temperature. The absence of a blanket, then, is not only about what was missing, but about how the body functioned in its presence. It suggests a form of rest shaped by continuity rather than separation, where the body did not escape the environment, but remained within it, adjusting as needed. And beneath the layers we use today, that older pattern still remains. It can be felt in the way the body reacts when warmth is slightly reduced, not with alarm, but with quiet movement, as if remembering a process that once unfolded every night, over and over, without interruption. When the body lies down, the ground becomes more than just a surface. It becomes part of the process that shapes how warmth is lost. Heat does not only move into the air, it also moves into whatever the body is touching, and the ground has a quiet ability to receive that heat without changing in any obvious way. At first contact, the difference between the warmth of the body and the cooler surface beneath it is clear, even if it is not consciously noticed. Over time, that difference begins to narrow, but not because the ground becomes warm in the same way the body does. Instead, the warmth from the body spreads outward into a much larger mass, where it disperses and fades. The body, by contrast, is limited. It produces heat, but it cannot store or distribute it across a wide area without losing it in the process. This creates a steady flow from body to ground, one that continues as long as there is contact. In a modern setting, this flow is often reduced by layers placed between the body and the surface. These layers slow the transfer of heat, creating a small barrier that helps the body retain what it produces. But without such layers, the exchange happens more directly. The ground does not need to be cold in an extreme sense to draw heat away. It only needs to be cooler than the body, which it usually is during the night. The effect is gradual. There is no sudden loss, no sharp change, only a slow movement that continues over time. The body responds in ways that are subtle but consistent. Areas in direct contact begin to cool more quickly than those exposed to air. The back, the hips, the shoulders, these become points where heat leaves the body more easily. In response, the body shifts, redistributing weight, changing the points of contact. These movements are not large or abrupt. They are small adjustments that happen without full awareness, often during light phases of sleep. If you pay attention to your own experience, you may notice how often you change position during the night, even when you do not remember doing so. Each shift can be understood as part of an ongoing process, one that balances comfort, pressure, and temperature. Without insulation beneath the body, the ground remains an active participant in that process. It does not adapt to the body in the way a soft surface might. It remains relatively stable, while the body continues to adjust in response to it. Across much of human history, sleeping surfaces were shaped by available materials and environments. Sometimes there may have been layers of plant matter, leaves, or other natural elements placed between the body and the ground. In some contexts, ash or soil might have been used to create a more stable surface. Archaeological findings suggest that people often prepared sleeping areas in ways that reduced direct contact with bare ground. But these preparations did not always create a fully insulating layer. The effectiveness of such materials would have varied depending on thickness, dryness, and the surrounding conditions. As a result, the exchange of heat between body and ground likely remained a regular part of the experience of rest. This does not imply a constant discomfort, but rather a condition in which the body and the ground were continuously interacting. The ground absorbed warmth without resistance, and the body responded through movement and adjustment. Over long periods of time, this interaction would have been familiar, not as a problem to be solved each night, but as a stable feature of the environment in which rest took place. The idea of separating the body completely from the ground, creating a neutral surface that neither draws heat away nor presses back, is relatively recent. Before such separation became common, the ground remained present in every moment of rest, quietly shaping how warmth moved and how the body responded to its loss. When the body remains in contact with the ground for a longer period, the movement of heat does not stop after the first moments of cooling. It continues, though the pattern becomes less obvious. The surface directly beneath the body may warm slightly, but that warmth does not stay concentrated. It spreads outward into the surrounding material, whether it is soil, stone, or compacted earth. These materials do not hold heat in the same way a fabric or a contained space might. They allow it to move through them, gradually dispersing into a larger area. Because of this, the body cannot rely on the ground to warm up and reduce the difference over time. Instead, the difference is maintained by the constant spreading of heat away from the point of contact. This creates a steady condition in which the body continues to lose warmth, even after it has already adjusted to the initial change. The process is slow enough that it rarely feels urgent, but persistent enough that it shapes how the body behaves over the course of the night. The areas pressed most firmly against the ground remain the most affected. The weight of the body increases the contact, and with it, the rate at which heat moves outward. In response, the body does not remain fixed in one position. It shifts, redistributing pressure, allowing previously cooled areas to recover slightly while new areas take their place against the surface. These shifts do not eliminate the exchange of heat. They simply move it from one part of the body to another, creating a kind of rotation that helps avoid a single area becoming too cold. This pattern can be observed even now, when conditions are more controlled. People turn during sleep, not only for comfort, but also as part of maintaining balance in pressure and temperature. In environments without insulating layers, this movement becomes more closely tied to the flow of heat. The body does not fully escape the influence of the ground, but it avoids remaining in one state for too long. Over time, these small adjustments form a rhythm, one that exists alongside the cycles of sleep itself. It is not a rhythm that requires awareness. It unfolds quietly, guided by the body's sensitivity to change. Across different landscapes, the nature of this exchange would have varied. A dry surface may have felt different from one that retained moisture, and a layer of organic material may have slowed the process compared to bare earth. Archaeological evidence suggests that people sometimes used plant matter or other available materials to create a more comfortable resting surface. These layers may have reduced direct contact and slowed the movement of heat, but they were not always thick or consistent enough to stop it entirely. Their effectiveness would have depended on how they were arranged and the conditions in which they were used. As a result, the interaction between body and ground likely remained present, even when some form of preparation was involved. The ground did not need to feel cold in an immediate sense to influence the body. Its role was steady rather than dramatic. It received heat, spread it outward, and maintained a difference that the body could not fully overcome on its own. This does not point to a single experience shared by all people in all times. Conditions varied widely, and so did the ways in which people adapted to them. But the underlying process of heat moving from body to ground and the body responding through quiet adjustment would have been a common thread across many of those variations. In this way, the ground was not just a place to lie down. It was an active element in the experience of rest, shaping how warmth was lost and how the body moved in response to that loss, night after night, without drawing attention to itself. As the night continues, the exchange between body and ground becomes less about a single moment of contact and more about a continuous pattern that unfolds slowly over time. Each time the body shifts, even slightly, a new area meets the surface beneath it, and the process begins again in a different place. The warmth that had gathered under one shoulder gradually fades as that part of the body lifts away, while another part settles and begins to lose heat in its place. This movement does not stop the loss of warmth. It redistributes it, preventing any single area from remaining in contact long enough for the cooling to become too concentrated. In this way, rest is not a fixed position held unchanged through the entire night, but a quiet sequence of small adjustments that follow the movement of heat. The body does not separate itself from the ground. It remains in continuous interaction with it, responding again and again as conditions shift in subtle ways. The ground, in contrast, does not respond or adapt. It does not retain warmth in a way that would ease the exchange. Instead, it continues to receive heat and spread it outward into a larger mass, maintaining a difference that keeps the process ongoing. This difference does not need to be large to matter. Even a modest contrast between the warmth of the body and the cooler surface beneath it is enough to sustain a steady outward flow over long periods of stillness. What makes this process significant is not its intensity, but its persistence. It unfolds slowly, without interruption, shaping the experience of rest in a way that is easy to overlook. If we compare this with modern sleeping conditions, the contrast becomes clearer. A mattress or even a simple insulating layer introduces a barrier that reduces direct contact. It traps small pockets of air and slows the movement of heat away from the body. Because of this, the body can remain in one position for longer without needing to adjust as frequently. The sense of stability that follows can give the impression that rest is naturally still and unchanging, but when that layer is removed and the body comes into more direct contact with the ground, the balance shifts again. The body becomes more active in a quiet, automatic way, not through conscious movement, but through repeated micro-adjustments that help manage the ongoing exchange of heat. These movements are often so subtle that they are not remembered. They occur during lighter phases of sleep, or even without fully interrupting deeper rest, forming a background rhythm that continues throughout the night. Archaeological observations from different regions suggest that people sometimes prepared their sleeping surfaces using available natural materials. Layers of grasses, leaves, or other plant matter may have been arranged to create a softer and slightly more insulated surface. In some cases, traces of ash or compacted organic material indicate repeated use of specific sleeping areas. These preparations likely provided some degree of separation between the body and the ground, slowing the transfer of heat. However, their effectiveness would have varied depending on thickness, dryness, and how recently they had been arranged. Over time, such materials compress, lose structure, or absorb moisture, which can reduce their insulating properties. As a result, even when some form of preparation was present, the exchange of heat between body and ground likely remained a regular feature of the experience of rest. The ground did not need to feel cold in a sharp or immediate sense to influence the body. Its role was steady and continuous rather than dramatic. It received warmth, dispersed it outward, and maintained a condition that the body had to adjust to over time. Across many environments and periods, this interaction would have been familiar, not as a problem to be solved each night, but as a stable part of the setting in which rest occurred. The absence of a blanket in this context is closely tied to this ongoing relationship. Without a layer above to hold warmth close to the body, and without a consistent insulating layer below, heat was free to move in both directions. It drifted upward into the air and downward into the ground, and the body responded within those limits. Rest did not remove the influence of the environment. It unfolded within it, shaped by a slow, continuous exchange that remained present from the moment the body lay down until the moment it rose again. Night does not arrive in the same way across all places. It does not carry a single temperature or a single feeling of cold that can be described once and applied everywhere. Instead, it changes depending on where the body is, how the land holds heat from the day, how the air moves after sunset, and how quickly that stored warmth begins to fade. In some environments, the ground may release heat slowly, allowing the air to remain relatively stable for a period after dark. In others, especially where the air is dry or the sky remains clear, heat can escape more quickly, and the drop in temperature becomes more noticeable as the night deepens. These differences do not need to be extreme to matter. Even a gradual cooling can influence how the body experiences rest, especially when there is little to separate it from the surrounding air. Across much of human history, people lived in a wide range of environments, from open landscapes to more sheltered areas. Each of these settings shaped how warmth was retained or lost during the night. In open spaces, where there are fewer barriers to air movement, the body is more exposed to changes in temperature. A light movement of air across the skin can increase the rate at which heat leaves the body, even if the air itself does not feel particularly cold. In more enclosed environments, such as areas surrounded by vegetation or natural formations, the movement of air may be reduced, allowing warmth to remain more stable for longer periods. However, these conditions are not constant. They shift with weather, with season, and with the natural patterns of the environment. Because of this, the experience of night is not fixed. It varies not only from place to place, but from one night to the next. The body, in turn, does not rely on a single expectation. It responds to what is present in that moment. If the air cools more quickly, the body begins to adjust sooner. If warmth lingers, those adjustments may be delayed. But in either case, the underlying process remains the same. Warmth is gradually lost, and the body responds through small changes that help manage that loss. This relationship between environment and body is not something that needs to be learned in a conscious way. It operates continuously, shaped by conditions that exist outside of deliberate control. When we consider the absence of a blanket, this variability becomes more significant. A blanket creates a consistent layer that reduces the impact of these changes. It holds warmth close to the body, making the surrounding environment less immediate. Without that layer, the body is more directly influenced by the conditions of the night. The cooling of the air, the movement of wind, the way the ground releases or absorbs heat, all of these become part of the experience of rest. Archaeological and environmental studies suggest that early humans occupied regions with diverse climates, but they also indicate that conditions could shift over relatively short periods due to seasonal cycles or longer-term changes in climate. These shifts would have influenced not only how people lived during the day, but also how they rested at night. The absence of a consistent insulating layer means that the body had to remain responsive to these variations, adjusting as needed without the ability to create a fully controlled environment. This does not imply that every night was marked by discomfort or that warmth was always insufficient. In some settings, the natural conditions may have provided enough stability for rest to occur with fewer adjustments. But across the broader span of human history, the variability of night temperatures would have remained a constant factor, shaping the way warmth was experienced and maintained. The body did not exist outside of these conditions. It remained within them, responding to changes that unfolded gradually, night after night. And without a layer to hold warmth in place, those changes were not distant or abstract. They were felt directly, as part of the quiet, ongoing process through which the body moved from wakefulness into rest, and remained there until morning arrived. As the night progresses, the way temperature changes is often uneven rather than steady. The air may cool gradually, but it does not always do so at the same rate from beginning to end. In some conditions, the early part of the night retains a portion of the warmth gathered during the day, especially if the ground has absorbed heat under direct sunlight. This stored warmth can be released slowly, creating a brief period in which the body does not feel an immediate loss. But as time passes, that stored heat diminishes and the balance shifts. The air becomes cooler, the ground less able to return warmth, and the difference between body and environment becomes more pronounced. This transition does not happen in a single moment. It unfolds quietly, often without drawing attention, but it changes how the body experiences rest. The same position that felt stable earlier may begin to feel slightly different, prompting small adjustments that are not always remembered upon waking. Across different environments, this pattern takes on different forms. In regions with clear skies, the absence of cloud cover can allow heat to escape more easily into the atmosphere, leading to a more noticeable cooling after sunset. In areas with more vegetation or humidity, the cooling may be slower or more variable, influenced by how the environment holds and releases moisture. These are broad patterns observed in environmental science, and they do not produce identical experiences in every location. However, they illustrate an important point. Night temperature is not a fixed condition, but a process that continues to change while the body is at rest. Without a consistent layer to hold warmth close, the body remains exposed to these changes as they occur. A blanket reduces the impact of this variability by creating a small, stable environment around the body. It limits the direct influence of the air and slows the rate at which heat is lost. Without it, the body is more closely connected to the shifting conditions of the night. The air that surrounds the skin is not contained. It moves, carries heat away, and is replaced by cooler air over time. This movement does not need to be strong to have an effect. Even slight changes in airflow can alter how quickly warmth is lost, especially over extended periods of stillness. The body responds in ways that are consistent with these changes. When cooling increases, muscles may tighten slightly, and posture may shift to reduce exposure. When conditions stabilize, the body may remain still for longer periods. These responses are not deliberate actions. They occur as part of the body's ongoing effort to maintain internal balance. Over the course of a single night, this can result in a sequence of adjustments that reflect the changing environment, even if the mind remains largely unaware of them. Archaeological and climatic research suggests that human populations experienced a wide range of environmental conditions over time, influenced by seasonal cycles, regional climates, and longer-term shifts. These variations would have affected not only daytime activity, but also the conditions under which people rested. Without consistent materials to create a controlled sleeping environment, the body would have remained responsive to these external changes. This does not mean that rest was constantly interrupted, but that it unfolded within a context that was not entirely stable. The absence of a blanket, in this sense, is closely tied to the absence of a fixed thermal boundary. Without that boundary, the body does not exist in a separate, insulated space during sleep. It remains connected to the broader environment, experiencing its gradual changes as part of the process of rest. And as the night moves forward, those changes continue, shaping how warmth is lost, how the body responds, and how sleep is experienced from one moment to the next. As the final part of the night approaches, the pattern of cooling often reaches its most stable form, but not its warmest. By this point, much of the heat stored in the ground and surrounding environment has already dispersed. The air no longer carries the lingering warmth of the day, and the surface beneath the body has settled into a temperature that changes more slowly. This does not mean that the environment becomes colder in a dramatic sense, but that it becomes more consistent in its difference from the body. The gap between body warmth and surrounding conditions remains present, and without a layer to hold heat close, that gap continues to guide the movement of warmth outward. The body, which has been adjusting throughout the night, does not stop these adjustments entirely. Instead, the frequency and intensity of movement may change. Earlier in the night, when temperatures are shifting more noticeably, the body may respond with more frequent repositioning. Later, as conditions stabilize, the body may remain still for longer periods, but the underlying process continues. Heat is still moving away from the skin, still dispersing into the air and the ground, and the body remains engaged in maintaining its internal balance within those limits. This stage of the night reveals something important about the relationship between rest and environment. Sleep is often imagined as a state that removes the body from external influence, allowing it to exist in a kind of protected stillness. But without insulation, that separation is incomplete. The body remains connected to the environment, not in a way that disrupts rest entirely, but in a way that shapes its texture. Rest becomes something that unfolds within a set of conditions rather than apart from them. The absence of a blanket makes this connection more visible. Without a layer to create a stable pocket of warmth, the body does not carry its own environment with it into sleep. It remains exposed to the broader patterns of the night, including the gradual cooling that continues even after the initial drop in temperature has passed. This exposure does not necessarily lead to discomfort in every case. In some climates, the difference between body and environment may remain within a range that allows for relatively stable rest. In others, the body may rely more heavily on its internal responses to maintain balance. These differences are shaped by geography, season, and local conditions, all of which have varied across human history. Archaeological and environmental evidence indicates that human populations adapted to a wide range of climates, but it does not suggest that they eliminated the influence of those climates during rest. Instead, it points to a pattern in which people lived within their environments, responding to them rather than fully controlling them. The experience of night, including its temperature, would have been part of that broader relationship. Without consistent insulating materials, the body remained in contact with these conditions, adjusting as needed without removing their influence entirely. As the night moves toward its end and the first signs of morning begin to appear, the process of heat loss does not suddenly reverse. The environment warms gradually, just as it cooled, and the body transitions out of its state of rest within that same continuity. The absence of a blanket, then, is not only about what was missing during the night, but about how the entire cycle of rest and waking was shaped by an environment that remained present at every stage. The body did not step outside of that environment to sleep. It remained within it, moving through the night as part of a process that included both rest and the steady ongoing exchange of warmth with the world around it. The human body carries its warmth from within, but that warmth is not unlimited, and it is not designed to remain unchanged without support. Heat is produced through ongoing processes inside the body, shaped by metabolism and circulation, and distributed through the movement of blood toward the skin. This internal activity creates a balance that allows the body to function across a range of conditions. But that balance depends on the relationship between what is produced and what is lost. When the surrounding environment draws heat away more quickly than it can be replaced, the body does not simply maintain its previous state. It begins to adjust, reducing loss where possible and conserving what remains. This adjustment does not require conscious awareness. It happens through systems that operate continuously, even during sleep. Blood flow to the outer parts of the body may decrease slightly, keeping more warmth closer to the center. The skin may feel cooler, not because the body has lost all its heat, but because it is redistributing it inward. This is a way of preserving essential functions, not a complete solution to the loss of warmth. Without an external layer to hold heat close, the body cannot fully prevent that loss. It can only slow it and manage its effects. In modern conditions, this internal process often works alongside external support. Clothing, blankets, and controlled environments reduce the demand placed on the body, allowing it to maintain warmth with less effort. But if those supports are absent, the body relies more heavily on its internal mechanisms. These mechanisms have limits. The human body does not have a thick layer of insulating fur, and while it can store some energy in the form of body fat, that storage does not function in the same way as an external covering that traps warm air. Instead, it provides a reserve that can be used over time, not an immediate barrier against heat loss. As a result, the body remains sensitive to the conditions around it, especially during periods of stillness when heat production is reduced. Sleep introduces a particular challenge in this balance. During rest, the body's overall activity decreases. Muscles are less active, and the production of heat through movement is reduced. At the same time, the ability to respond to changes in temperature becomes less direct. The body continues to regulate itself, but it does so within a narrower range of responses. It cannot rely on large movements or deliberate actions to restore warmth. Instead, it depends on smaller adjustments, such as changes in posture or subtle increases in muscle tension. These responses can help, but they do not replace the role of an insulating layer. If we consider the broader span of human history, this limitation becomes more apparent. Without consistent access to materials that could trap heat effectively, the body would have remained exposed to ongoing heat loss during sleep. This does not imply that the body was unable to cope, but that it operated within a different balance, one in which internal regulation played a larger role, and external insulation was not always available. Over time, this balance would have shaped how rest was experienced. The body did not exist in a perfectly stable thermal environment. It existed in one where warmth had to be maintained through a combination of internal processes and environmental conditions. Archaeological and biological evidence suggests that humans adapted to a wide range of climates, but these adaptations did not eliminate the need for external insulation. Instead, they allowed the body to function within certain limits, responding to cold through mechanisms that preserved core temperature rather than preventing all heat loss. The absence of a blanket, in this context, highlights those limits. It reveals a condition in which the body's ability to generate and conserve heat was active, but not sufficient to create a fully stable state during sleep. Warmth was maintained, but not held in place. It moved gradually outward, and the body responded within that movement, adjusting as needed without fully stopping the process itself. The body's ability to conserve warmth does not rely on a single mechanism, but on several processes working together, each one adjusting quietly as conditions change. One of the most noticeable is the narrowing of blood vessels near the surface of the skin. When the surrounding environment draws heat away, the body reduces the flow of warm blood to these outer areas, keeping more heat closer to the center. This change is gradual and often subtle. The skin may feel cooler to the touch, while the deeper parts of the body remain more stable. This is not a sign that warmth has disappeared, but that it is being preserved in a different way. However, this process has limits. Reducing heat loss at the surface also means that the outer parts of the body receive less warmth, which can increase sensitivity to the surrounding environment. The hands, feet, and exposed areas become more responsive to changes in temperature, even when the core remains relatively steady. Another response involves small, involuntary muscle activity. When the body begins to lose more heat than it can comfortably replace, muscles may contract in brief, rhythmic ways. This activity produces heat, helping to offset some of the loss. In stronger forms, this can become more noticeable, but even at lower levels, it contributes to maintaining balance. During sleep, this process continues in a reduced and less coordinated form. The body does not fully engage in active movement, but it still generates small amounts of heat through these subtle contractions. These responses do not eliminate the influence of the environment. They operate within it, helping the body manage ongoing changes rather than preventing them entirely. Without an external layer to trap warm air close to the skin, the heat produced through these mechanisms can still move outward. The air surrounding the body is not contained, and as it warms it rises or shifts, replaced by cooler air. This creates a continuous cycle in which warmth is produced, lost, and partially replaced, but not fully retained. In modern conditions, this cycle is often interrupted by materials that hold warm air in place, reducing the need for constant internal adjustment. A blanket, for example, creates a thin layer of still air that remains close to the body, slowing the movement of heat away from the skin. Without such a layer, the body remains more exposed to the flow of air and the gradual cooling that occurs throughout the night. Over longer periods of time, the body also relies on stored energy to support heat production. This energy is drawn from reserves that have been built through daily activity and nutrition. It allows the body to continue generating warmth even when external conditions are less favorable. But this is not an immediate solution to heat loss. It is a background process that supports overall function, not a direct replacement for insulation. As a result, the body remains dependent on both its internal systems and the conditions around it. Across much of human history, these internal mechanisms would have been continuously active during periods of rest, especially in environments where external insulation was limited. The body did not exist in isolation from its surroundings. It responded to them, adjusting blood flow, muscle activity, and posture in ways that helped maintain internal stability. These adjustments were not always enough to create a completely stable sense of warmth, but they allowed the body to function within a range of conditions. Archaeological and biological research indicates that humans adapted to varying climates through a combination of behavior and physiology, but it does not suggest that these adaptations remove the need for external support entirely. Instead, they reveal a balance in which the body's internal responses worked alongside available materials and environmental conditions. The absence of a blanket highlights the limits of these internal processes. It shows that while the body can conserve and generate heat, it cannot fully contain it without some form of external barrier. Warmth, in this context, remains something that must be managed, not something that remains unchanged on its own. And during sleep, when the body is less active and more exposed to gradual changes, that management continues quietly, guided by systems that operate without awareness, maintaining balance as heat slowly moves away. Even when the body manages to preserve warmth at its center, the sense of temperature across the whole body is not uniform. There is a quiet difference between what is maintained internally and what is felt at the surface. The core remains more stable, supported by continuous circulation and internal regulation, while the outer layers respond more directly to the environment. This difference is not an error. It is part of how the body protects itself, keeping essential functions stable even when conditions change. But it also means that the experience of warmth during rest is not evenly distributed. Certain areas become more sensitive to cooling, especially those farther from the center or more exposed to air and contact with the ground. The hands, feet, shoulders, and sides of the body may cool more quickly, creating a pattern in which some parts feel settled while others continue to adjust. During sleep, this unevenness becomes more noticeable, not because the mind is focused on it, but because the body is less able to correct it through deliberate action. Movement still occurs, but it is limited to small automatic shifts rather than sustained activity. These shifts help redistribute warmth, but they do not create a fully balanced state. Instead, the body moves through a sequence of partial adjustments, each one addressing a local change without altering the overall condition. This pattern suggests that warmth, in the absence of insulation, is not something the body holds in a single, stable form. It is something that varies across the body, changing gradually as different areas come into contact with the environment. In modern conditions, this unevenness is often reduced. A blanket or layer of clothing helps to create a more uniform space around the body, allowing warmth to be shared across its surface rather than lost unevenly. The difference between core and skin becomes less pronounced, and the need for constant adjustment decreases. But when that layer is absent, the body remains more directly connected to its surroundings. The air moves across the skin, the ground draws heat from specific points of contact, and the distribution of warmth shifts accordingly. Over the course of the night, this creates a subtle rhythm in which different parts of the body take on the role of losing heat, while others recover slightly as contact changes. Archaeological evidence does not provide a detailed record of how this process was felt, but it does suggest that consistent, fully insulating materials were not always available across all environments and periods. While animal skins and plant materials may have been used at times, their availability and effectiveness would have varied. This implies that the body's internal responses played an ongoing role in maintaining balance during rest. The uneven distribution of warmth would not have been an occasional event, but a regular feature of how the body interacted with its environment. This does not mean that rest was defined by discomfort, but that it included a range of sensations that shifted over time, shaped by contact, airflow, and the gradual movement of heat. The absence of a blanket in this context is closely tied to this unevenness. Without a layer to hold warmth evenly around the body, temperature becomes something that is experienced differently from one area to another. The body remains stable where it needs to, but it does not maintain a single, uniform sense of warmth across its entire surface. Instead, it adapts continuously, allowing some areas to cool while preserving others, moving gently through the night in a state that is balanced, but not fixed. And within that balance, warmth is not a constant condition. It is something that shifts, redistributes, and settles again, guided by the quiet interaction between the body and the environment that surrounds it. Sleep is often imagined as a state of complete withdrawal, as if the body steps away from the environment and rests in a kind of protected stillness. But in reality, sleep does not remove the body from its surroundings. It changes how the body responds to them. During wakefulness, a person can notice discomfort, adjust position, seek warmth, or change the conditions around them. During sleep, those responses become more limited. The body continues to regulate itself, but it does so with fewer options, relying on slower and more automatic processes. This makes sleep a more vulnerable state, not because the body stops functioning, but because its ability to respond directly is reduced. When warmth begins to decrease, the body does not immediately correct it in the same way it would while awake. Instead, it allows the change to continue for a time, adjusting gradually through subtle movements and internal regulation. This creates a different relationship between the body and the environment, one in which changes are absorbed rather than immediately corrected. The loss of heat during this time becomes part of the background of sleep, not always strong enough to wake the mind, but present enough to shape how the body rests. Without a blanket or insulating layer, this vulnerability becomes more apparent. The body is more directly exposed to the air and the ground, and the small changes in temperature that occur during the night have a more immediate effect. The skin senses these changes, but the response is slower and less deliberate. A shift in position may occur, but it is not always timed to prevent the loss of warmth. Instead, it follows it, adjusting after the change has already begun. This delay does not mean the body is unprotected. It reflects the way sleep reorganizes the body's priorities. During rest, the body reduces activity, allowing certain processes to continue while others are quieted. Movement is minimized, awareness is lowered, and responses become more distributed over time rather than immediate. This means that maintaining warmth depends more heavily on conditions that support it passively. In modern settings, this support is often provided by materials that hold warmth close to the body, reducing the need for active response. But without those materials, the body remains more exposed to ongoing changes. Across much of human history, this condition would not have been unusual. Sleep would have taken place within environments that were not fully controlled, where temperature could shift gradually and where insulation was not always consistent. The body's vulnerability during sleep would have been part of that experience, shaping how rest unfolded over time. This does not imply constant disturbance or discomfort. Instead, it suggests a form of rest that includes a degree of openness to the environment, where changes are felt and responded to in a slower, more integrated way. Archaeological and biological evidence indicates that humans developed various strategies to manage their environments, but these strategies did not always create complete separation from external conditions. Shelter, fire, and available materials may have reduced exposure, but they did not eliminate it entirely. As a result, sleep remained connected to the surrounding world, influenced by factors such as temperature, airflow, and the properties of the ground. The absence of a blanket highlights this connection. Without a consistent layer to stabilize warmth, the body does not carry its own environment into sleep. It remains part of a larger system, responding to changes that continue throughout the night. In this way, sleep is not a state of isolation, but a state of altered engagement, where the body rests while still participating in the slow, continuous exchange of heat with its surroundings. During sleep, the body does not remain in a single, unchanging condition. It moves through different stages, each with its own pattern of activity and responsiveness. These stages are not sharply separated in experience, but they influence how the body reacts to the environment. In lighter phases of sleep, small adjustments are more likely to occur. A shift in posture, a slight repositioning of the limbs, or a gradual turn of the body can happen without fully waking the mind. These movements allow the body to respond, in part, to changes in temperature, pressure, or contact with the ground. In deeper phases of sleep, however, movement becomes less frequent. The body settles into a more stable position, and the ability to respond to external changes is reduced. This creates a period in which the body is more passive, maintaining its internal processes while interacting less directly with the environment. Without an insulating layer, this difference between stages becomes more significant. When the body enters a deeper phase and remains still for longer, the ongoing loss of heat is less likely to be interrupted by movement. The skin continues to exchange heat with the air and the ground, but the body does not adjust its position as often to manage that exchange. This does not mean that the body is unaware of the change. The systems that regulate temperature continue to operate, adjusting blood flow and muscle activity in subtle ways. But the absence of larger movements means that the redistribution of warmth across the body is limited. The same areas remain in contact with the ground or exposed to air for longer periods, allowing the process of cooling to continue more steadily. As the body transitions back into lighter stages of sleep, movement becomes more likely again. A shift may occur, redistributing contact and altering the pattern of heat loss. In this way, the night becomes a sequence of alternating conditions. Periods of relative stillness allow heat to move away more consistently, while periods of movement interrupt that process and redistribute warmth across different areas of the body. This pattern does not fully prevent the loss of heat, but it creates a balance in which no single state persists for too long. In modern environments, this balance is often less noticeable. Insulating materials reduce the impact of prolonged stillness by slowing the rate of heat loss, allowing the body to remain in deeper stages of sleep without the same degree of thermal change. Without such materials, the connection between sleep stages and temperature becomes more apparent. The body's vulnerability during deeper sleep is not due to a failure of its systems, but to the reduced range of responses available during that time. Across much of human history, sleep would have taken place within environments where these variations were present. The body moved through its natural cycles of sleep, while remaining exposed to gradual changes in temperature. The absence of a blanket meant that these changes were not buffered by a stable layer of warm air. Instead, they were experienced more directly, shaping how the body adjusted over the course of the night. Archaeological and physiological evidence suggests that human sleep has long included cycles of varying depth, but the conditions under which those cycles occurred have changed over time. The introduction of consistent insulating materials has altered the relationship between sleep stages and the environment, reducing the need for the body to adjust as frequently. Without those materials, the body remained more closely tied to its surroundings, with each phase of sleep interacting differently with the ongoing movement of heat. The absence of a blanket, in this context, is not only about exposure to cold, but about how that exposure interacts with the natural structure of sleep itself. It reveals a pattern in which rest is shaped by alternating periods of responsiveness and stillness, each one influencing how warmth is lost and how the body adapts to that loss over time. As the body moves through the later portions of the night, the pattern of sleep becomes more fluid, with transitions occurring more frequently between lighter and deeper states. These transitions are not abrupt. They unfold gradually, often without any clear awareness, but they influence how the body continues to interact with its surroundings. In lighter phases, the body is more responsive. Small changes in temperature are more likely to lead to subtle movements, and these movements help redistribute contact with the ground and alter how heat is lost. In deeper phases, the body becomes quieter again, remaining in a more stable position while internal processes continue. Without an insulating layer, these alternating states shape the experience of warmth in a way that is not entirely even. The body does not maintain a single, stable temperature across the entire night. Instead, it moves through periods where warmth is held more effectively, followed by periods where it is gradually reduced. This pattern does not necessarily lead to waking. The changes are often small enough to remain within the range that the body can manage without bringing the mind into full awareness, but they still influence how rest is experienced at a physical level. The absence of a blanket makes this pattern more visible. Without a layer to hold warmth in place, each shift in sleep depth interacts directly with the surrounding environment. During deeper phases, when movement is reduced, the loss of heat can continue more steadily. During lighter phases, when movement returns, that loss is interrupted and redistributed. The body moves, settles, and moves again, following a rhythm that is shaped both by internal cycles and by external conditions. Over time, these overlapping rhythms create a form of rest that is not entirely still, but not disrupted either. It is continuous, but dynamic, shaped by small changes that occur without drawing attention. If we consider how this process might have unfolded across much of human history, it suggests that sleep did not take place in a fully stabilized environment. Instead, it occurred within a setting where temperature could shift gradually and where the body's responses were part of the structure of rest itself. Archaeological evidence indicates that people often used available materials to prepare sleeping areas, but these preparations did not always create a consistent insulating barrier. As a result, the body remained connected to the environment throughout the night, with its natural cycles of sleep interacting with ongoing changes in temperature. This does not imply that rest was ineffective or constantly interrupted. Rather, it suggests that rest included these variations as part of its normal pattern. The body did not require complete thermal stability to sleep. It operated within a range, adjusting as needed through processes that did not depend on conscious control. The absence of a blanket highlights this relationship between internal cycles and external conditions. It shows that sleep is not a state that removes the body from the world, but one that reorganizes how the body engages with it. Even in stillness, the body remains responsive, moving through phases that influence how warmth is lost and how it is preserved. And as morning approaches, the gradual return of warmth in the environment begins to shift this balance again, not suddenly, but through the same slow continuity that shaped the night. The body rises out of sleep within this ongoing exchange, having passed through hours of quiet adjustment, guided not by a fixed condition, but by a process that remained in motion from beginning to end. Fire changes the experience of night, but it does not remove the need for warmth in the way a blanket does. It introduces a source of heat that is visible, local, and dependent on conditions that can shift over time. When a fire burns steadily, it can warm the air nearby and create a zone in which the loss of heat from the body slows. The side of the body facing the fire may feel noticeably warmer, while the opposite side remains exposed to the cooler air and the ground. This creates an uneven distribution of warmth, one that depends on distance, orientation, and the strength of the fire itself. Unlike a blanket which surrounds the body and holds warmth close on all sides, fire works in a single direction. It radiates outward, and its effect diminishes with distance. The closer the body is, the more noticeable the warmth becomes, but proximity also introduces limits. A fire cannot be approached indefinitely, and its intensity may change as fuel is consumed. Over the course of the night, this creates a shifting balance. The warmth provided by the fire may increase or decrease, and the body must adjust its position in response. These adjustments are not constant, but they form part of the interaction between the body and the environment during rest. Archaeological evidence suggests that controlled use of fire has been present in human history for a long time, but it does not indicate that fire was always available in a stable or continuous form. Maintaining a fire requires fuel, attention, and conditions that allow it to burn. In some environments, fuel may have been abundant, making it easier to sustain warmth through the night. In others, fuel may have been limited, or environmental conditions may have made it more difficult to keep a fire burning steadily. This variability means that the presence of fire did not create a uniform solution to the problem of heat loss during sleep. Even when a fire was present, it did not necessarily provide consistent warmth throughout the entire night. As fuel is consumed, the intensity of the fire changes. The warmth it produces may diminish unless additional material is added. During sleep, when attention is reduced, the fire may not be maintained at the same level as it would be during wakefulness. This introduces a gradual shift in conditions, similar to the natural cooling of the environment, but influenced by human activity. The body in turn responds to these changes. When warmth from the fire decreases, the body may begin to adjust more frequently, redistributing contact with the ground and altering its orientation relative to the remaining heat source. If warmth increases, these adjustments may become less frequent, allowing for longer periods of stillness. The relationship between fire and the body during sleep is therefore dynamic. It depends on the state of the fire, the arrangement of the sleeping area, and the surrounding conditions. It does not create a fully enclosed or stable thermal environment. Instead, it adds another element to the existing exchange of heat between the body, the air, and the ground. The absence of a blanket remains significant even in the presence of fire. Without a layer that traps warm air close to the skin, the body cannot fully retain the heat it receives. The air warmed by the fire moves and disperses, and the ground continues to draw heat away through contact. The body remains part of this system, adjusting as needed rather than resting within a fixed condition. Over long periods of time, this interaction would have shaped how rest was experienced. Fire provided a source of warmth that could reduce the rate of heat loss, but it did not eliminate it. The body continued to rely on its internal processes and its ability to adjust position, even when an external source of heat was present. In this way, fire represents a partial change rather than a complete solution. It alters the conditions of rest, but it does not replace the need for a stable, enclosing layer that holds warmth close to the body throughout the night. As the night deepens, the fire rarely remains in a single, unchanged state. Its warmth depends on the fuel it consumes, and that fuel diminishes gradually as the hours pass. Even when a fire is built with care, its intensity is not fixed. It rises when new material is added, then slowly declines as that material is reduced to embers. This creates a rhythm that is different from the steady presence of an insulating layer. A blanket holds warmth in place with little variation, but a fire introduces cycles of increase and decrease, shaping the environment in a way that shifts over time. During the earlier part of the night, when the fire is stronger, the air nearby may feel more stable. The body can remain in one position for longer, especially if it is oriented toward the source of heat. But as the fire weakens, that stability changes. The warmth becomes less concentrated, and the air begins to cool more noticeably. This transition does not happen all at once. It unfolds gradually, often without drawing full awareness, but it influences how the body experiences rest. The same position that once felt sufficient may begin to feel slightly cooler, prompting a small adjustment. The body may turn, move closer, or shift its orientation, not as a deliberate action, but as part of an ongoing response to changing conditions. In this way, the fire does not create a constant environment. It introduces variation, adding another layer to the already shifting patterns of night temperature. The body responds not only to the natural cooling of the air and the steady exchange with the ground, but also to the changing presence of the fire itself. These influences overlap, creating a complex pattern in which warmth is never entirely fixed. Archaeological evidence suggests that maintaining a fire over long periods requires attention and resources. Fuel must be gathered, arranged, and replenished. In some contexts, this may have been done throughout the night, but in others, the fire may have been allowed to diminish as sleep took precedence. This does not imply a single behavior across all groups or environments, but it highlights the variability of fire as a source of warmth. It is not self-sustaining. It depends on ongoing interaction, and during sleep, that interaction becomes less consistent. As a result, the body cannot rely on the fire to provide continuous warmth in the same way it might rely on a stable insulating layer. Instead, it remains responsive, adjusting as the fire's intensity changes. When the fire burns lower, the body's internal mechanisms take on a larger role. Blood flow may shift, posture may change, and small movements may occur more frequently to manage the increasing loss of heat. When the fire is stronger, these adjustments may become less frequent, but they do not disappear entirely. The body remains part of a system in which warmth is influenced by multiple factors, none of which remain completely stable. The absence of a blanket becomes more apparent in this context. Without a layer that holds warm air close to the skin, the heat from the fire cannot be fully retained. It reaches the body, but it also moves away, carried by the air and lost through contact with the ground. The body receives warmth, but it does not keep it in a consistent way. Over time, this creates a pattern in which warmth is experienced in waves rather than as a steady condition. The body warms slightly when the fire is stronger, then gradually cools as it weakens, moving through these changes as part of the process of rest. This pattern does not prevent sleep, but it shapes its texture. Rest becomes something that unfolds within a shifting environment, influenced by both natural conditions and the changing state of the fire. The body adapts to this pattern, not by eliminating the variation, but by adjusting within it, maintaining balance as warmth rises and falls over the course of the night. Even when a fire remains present through the night, its warmth does not reach every part of the body in the same way. Heat from a flame moves outward through radiation and through the warming of the surrounding air, but both of these processes depend on direction, distance, and the movement of that air. The side of the body facing the fire may receive more warmth, while the opposite side remains exposed to cooler conditions. This creates a pattern that is uneven rather than balanced. The body does not sit within a fully enclosed space of warmth. It remains partially warmed and partially exposed at the same time. This unevenness becomes more noticeable during periods of stillness. When the body lies in one position for longer, the difference between the side facing the fire and the side turned away becomes clearer. The warmed side may feel relatively stable, while the other side continues to lose heat through contact with the ground and exposure to the surrounding air. Over time, this imbalance leads to small adjustments. The body may turn slightly, shifting the area that faces the fire, allowing previously cooled areas to receive some warmth. These movements are not abrupt. They are slow, often occurring without full awareness, but they help redistribute the limited warmth that the fire provides. In this way, the presence of fire changes the pattern of movement rather than removing the need for it. Instead of adjusting only to the ground and the air, the body also adjusts to the direction of the heat source. Archaeological observations suggest that people often arranged their sleeping areas in relation to a fire, positioning themselves to receive warmth while maintaining a safe distance. This arrangement may have reduced the rate of heat loss on one side of the body, but it did not create a uniform condition across the entire surface. The ground still absorbed heat through contact, and the air continued to carry warmth away from exposed areas. The fire added warmth, but it did not contain it. It remained an open source, influencing the environment rather than enclosing it. This distinction is important. A blanket works by creating a small, stable layer around the body, trapping air and slowing the movement of heat in all directions. Fire, by contrast, operates within the open environment. It warms the air, but that air moves. It warms the body, but only where it reaches directly. The absence of a surrounding layer means that the warmth provided by the fire cannot be held in place in the same way. It is received, but it is also lost, often at the same time. The body, therefore, continues to operate within a balance that is only partially altered by the presence of fire. Across much of human history, This would have created a form of rest in which warmth was directional and changing. The body might warm on one side, then cool as it shifts, then warm again as it turns back. This pattern does not suggest instability in the sense of constant disturbance, but it does indicate that rest was shaped by ongoing interaction with the environment. The fire provided a point of warmth, but it did not remove the broader conditions of the night. The body remained connected to the ground beneath it and the air around it, adjusting as needed to maintain internal balance. The absence of a blanket remains significant within this context. Without a layer that holds warmth evenly around the body, the heat from the fire cannot create a fully stable condition. It reduces the loss of heat in certain directions, but not in all. The body continues to move through a pattern of partial warming and gradual cooling, guided by the position of the fire and the changing conditions of the night. And within that pattern, rest is not defined by a constant temperature, but by a series of small adjustments that allow the body to remain balanced, even as warmth moves in and out of reach. Materials that could hold warmth close to the body did exist at various points in human history, but their presence was not constant, and their use was shaped by conditions that changed over time. Animal skins are often considered one of the earliest forms of covering, and there is evidence that they were used for clothing and possibly for resting surfaces. However, the availability of such materials depended on many factors, including access to animals, the success of hunting, and the ability to process and preserve the hides. These are not fixed conditions. They vary from place to place and from one period to another. A skin that has been freshly obtained does not immediately function as a stable covering. It requires preparation, drying, and sometimes further treatment to become flexible and durable. Without these processes, the material may remain stiff, retain moisture, or lose its effectiveness over time. This means that even when animal skins were present, they were not always in a form that could be used consistently as a layer to hold warmth during sleep. The idea of a blanket as a soft and reliable covering used night after night depends on materials that are both available and stable. Across much of human history, that stability was not always guaranteed. In addition to availability, there is the question of how materials were used. A skin might serve multiple purposes, such as clothing during movement, protection from wind, or covering during rest. The same material may not have been dedicated solely to sleep in the way a blanket is today. This introduces a form of variability. The conditions of rest could change depending on how materials were distributed and used at any given time. In some situations, a skin may have been placed beneath the body to reduce contact with the ground. In others, it may have been worn or used as a covering. The choice would depend on immediate needs rather than a fixed arrangement. This suggests that the presence of insulating materials did not create a uniform experience of warmth during sleep. Instead, it introduced another layer of variation, shaped by practical considerations and changing circumstances. Archaeological findings provide some insight into the use of animal skins and other organic materials, but these materials do not always preserve well over long periods. What remains are indirect signs, such as tools used for processing hides or residues that suggest contact with animal products. These findings indicate that people had the ability to work with such materials, but they do not confirm how consistently they were used as coverings during sleep. This uncertainty is important. It prevents us from assuming that the presence of a material automatically led to its use in a specific way. The absence of clear, continuous evidence suggests that the use of insulating coverings was likely uneven, influenced by environment, resource availability, and cultural practices that are not fully preserved in the archaeological record. In environments where temperatures were milder, the need for a dedicated covering may have been less immediate. In colder regions, the need would have been greater, but so would the challenges of obtaining and maintaining suitable materials. This creates a balance in which the use of coverings may have increased in certain contexts, but not in a way that applied uniformly across all of human history. The absence of a blanket, in this broader sense, is not simply the absence of a single object. It reflects a condition in which the materials needed to create a stable, enclosing layer were not always available, not always processed in the same way, and not always used for the same purpose. The body, therefore, remained more directly connected to the environment during sleep, relying on a combination of available materials and internal responses to maintain warmth. Even when some form of covering was present, it did not necessarily function as a consistent or complete barrier. Warmth was still influenced by contact with the ground, the movement of air, and the changing conditions of the night. Even when animal skins or plant-based materials were available, their effectiveness as a source of warmth depended on how they were prepared and how they were used in a specific moment. A skin that has been dried and softened can provide some insulation, but if it becomes damp, compressed, or worn, its ability to hold warmth can change. Organic materials do not remain in a fixed condition. They absorb moisture from the air, from the ground, or from the body itself. Over time, this moisture can reduce the small pockets of air that allow the material to slow the movement of heat. When those pockets are reduced, the material becomes less effective as a barrier. It may still provide some separation from the ground, but it no longer holds warmth in the same way. This means that even when a covering exists, its ability to function like a stable blanket is not guaranteed. It changes with use, with environment, and with time. In addition to the condition of the material, there is also the question of how it is positioned. A skin placed beneath the body may reduce direct contact with the ground, but it does not prevent heat from leaving through the upper surface of the body. A skin placed above the body may slow the loss of heat into the air, but it may not fully prevent contact with the ground from drawing warmth away. In many cases, a single material may not be sufficient to create a fully enclosed layer around the body. The arrangement of materials becomes important, and that arrangement may not have been consistent from one night to the next. The body adapts within these changing conditions, but the level of insulation it receives is not fixed. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans used a variety of natural materials, including grasses, leaves, and other plant matter, to prepare resting areas. These materials may have been layered to create a softer surface and to introduce some separation from the ground. Like animal skins, however, their effectiveness depends on thickness, dryness, and structure. When freshly gathered and loosely arranged, plant materials can trap small amounts of air, which helps slow the movement of heat. Over time, these materials can compress, break down, or become damp, reducing their insulating properties. This suggests that the preparation of a sleeping surface was not a one-time solution, but a process that may have required renewal and adjustment. Without consistent maintenance, the effectiveness of these materials would change, and the body would experience a corresponding shift in how warmth was retained. The use of such materials also depends on availability. In some environments, suitable plant matter may have been abundant, making it easier to create a layered surface. In others, such materials may have been sparse or seasonal, limiting their use. This variability means that the presence of insulating materials cannot be assumed as a constant feature across all contexts. Instead, it reflects a set of possibilities that were realized differently depending on local conditions. Even when these materials were used, they did not necessarily create a uniform or complete barrier. Gaps may have remained, areas of direct contact may have persisted, and the movement of air around the body would still influence the overall balance of warmth. The absence of a blanket, in this context, is not simply about a lack of materials. It is about the lack of a consistent enclosed system that holds warmth in a stable way. Animal skins and plant materials could reduce heat loss, but they did not always function as a reliable, repeatable solution. The body remained part of an environment in which warmth was influenced by multiple factors, each one changing over time. Internal regulation, material condition, and environmental variability all interacted, creating a pattern in which warmth was managed rather than fully controlled. Sleep unfolded within this pattern, shaped by the combined effect of these elements rather than defined by a single, stable layer of insulation. Even when materials were present and prepared with care, their use was shaped by needs that extended beyond rest. A skin or a layer of plant material was not always reserved for a single purpose. It could serve as protection during movement, as a barrier against wind, or as a surface for sitting and working. This meant that the same material might be used in different ways over the course of a day, changing its condition and availability by the time night arrived. If a skin had been worn or carried, it might retain moisture or become compressed. If plant materials had been used earlier, they might be scattered or reduced in thickness. The state of these materials at the moment of rest would not always match the ideal conditions for holding warmth. This introduces another form of variability. The body does not encounter a consistent layer each night. It encounters whatever form the available materials take after being used, moved, and altered by daily activity. In this way, the conditions of rest are not fixed in advance. They are shaped by what remains at the end of the day. Archaeological evidence indicates that early humans had the ability to process and use a range of organic materials, but it does not suggest that these materials were always organized into a stable, repeatable system for sleep. The tools associated with hide preparation and plant use point to skill and adaptability, but they also reflect a flexibility in how materials were applied. This flexibility means that the same environment could produce different sleeping conditions from one occasion to the next. In some cases, materials may have been arranged carefully to create a more insulating surface. In others, the arrangement may have been more minimal, depending on time, resources, or other immediate needs. The body adapts within this range, but the level of insulation it experiences is not uniform. It changes with context, reflecting the broader patterns of life rather than a single, controlled setup. The absence of a blanket becomes clearer when we consider this variability. A blanket, as it is understood today, is a dedicated object. It is designed to hold warmth, used primarily for that purpose, and kept in a condition that supports repeated use. It creates a predictable environment for rest, one that does not depend on the shifting demands of the day. Without such an object, warmth is managed through materials that are part of a larger system of use, rather than a single function. This means that the body does not rely on a stable layer that can be applied in the same way each night. Instead, it responds to a changing combination of factors, including the condition of materials, the arrangement of the sleeping area, and the surrounding environment. Across much of human history, this would have created a form of rest that was shaped by continuity rather than standardization. The body encountered different conditions from one night to the next, adjusting as needed without the expectation of a fixed solution. Even when materials were available, they did not always provide complete or consistent insulation. Gaps remained, areas of exposure persisted, and the movement of heat continued through contact with the ground and the air. The body remained part of this exchange, using its internal processes and small adjustments to maintain balance. The absence of a blanket, in this sense, reflects not only the limits of available materials, but also the broader context in which those materials were used. It points to a way of living in which rest was integrated into a system of daily activity, and where the conditions of warmth were shaped by what was possible in that moment, rather than by a fixed and dedicated layer designed to hold it in place. Movement changes what the body can carry, and what the body can carry shapes how warmth is managed at night. In conditions where people remain in one place for longer periods, it becomes easier to gather, store, and maintain materials that can be used repeatedly. Layers can be built up, adjusted, and kept in a relatively stable condition from one night to the next. But when movement becomes a regular part of life, this stability becomes more difficult to maintain. Each object carried has weight, takes space, and competes with other necessities. Tools, food, water, and materials for shelter all place demands on what can be transported. In this context, the ability to carry a dedicated item for warmth during sleep is not guaranteed. It depends on how essential that item is compared to other needs that must also be met. This does not mean that warmth was unimportant. It means that the way warmth was managed had to fit within a system that included movement, resource use, and changing environments. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that many early human groups lived in ways that involved regular movement across landscapes, following resources that varied with season and location. This movement did not happen in the same way everywhere, and it did not follow a single pattern. Some groups may have stayed in one area for longer periods, while others moved more frequently. But across these variations, mobility remained a significant factor in how materials were used and maintained. Items that were heavy, bulky, or required careful preservation would have been more difficult to carry over long distances. This creates a practical limit on how much material could be dedicated to a single purpose, such as insulating the body during sleep. A large, thick covering that traps warmth effectively may also be difficult to transport, especially if it becomes wet or needs to be kept clean and intact. As a result, the presence of a consistent, blanket-like layer is less likely in contexts where movement is frequent. Instead, warmth is managed through materials that serve multiple functions, or through strategies that do not depend on carrying large amounts of additional weight. The body remains central to this system, relying on its own processes and on the immediate environment to maintain balance. The absence of a blanket, in this sense, is not only about the availability of materials, but about the constraints placed on their use by the need to move. Each night, the conditions of rest are shaped by what has been carried, what has been gathered locally, and what can be arranged in a short period of time. This introduces variability, not only in the materials themselves, but in how they are used. A layer that might be available in one location may not be present in another. A surface that provides some insulation one night may be replaced by a different arrangement the next. The body adapts within this changing context, but it does not rely on a fixed system. Instead, it operates within a range of conditions, adjusting to the materials and environment that are present at that moment. This does not suggest that warmth was always limited or that rest was consistently affected in the same way. In some environments, local materials may have been sufficient to create a temporary insulating layer. In others, the body may have relied more heavily on its internal responses and on the arrangement of space, such as proximity to others or to a source of heat. The key point is that mobility introduces a constraint that prevents the consistent use of a single, stable covering across all nights and locations. The absence of a blanket reflects this broader condition, where the management of warmth is shaped not only by what is available, but by what can be carried, maintained, and used within a system that includes movement as a central element of life. Movement does not only limit what can be carried, it also changes how materials are maintained and how long they can remain in a useful condition. When a group returns to the same place repeatedly, materials can be left, repaired, or gradually improved. Layers can be built over time, and the effort invested in preparing them can carry forward into future nights. But when movement continues across different locations, this continuity becomes more difficult to sustain. Materials are exposed to changing conditions, and their condition can shift more quickly as a result. A covering that is carried from one place to another may encounter moisture, uneven ground, or repeated compression. Each of these factors can reduce its ability to hold warmth. Over time, the material may become thinner, less structured, or less effective at creating the small pockets of air that slow the movement of heat. This does not mean that materials cannot be used during movement. It means that their effectiveness is less stable, and that maintaining them requires effort that may compete with other needs. In a mobile context, the body cannot assume that a covering will function in the same way each night. It must adapt to changes in the condition of that covering, just as it adapts to changes in the environment. This introduces a different kind of variability, one that comes not only from external conditions, but from the gradual transformation of the materials themselves. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans used a wide range of materials for shelter and rest, but it also indicates that many of these materials were organic and subject to decay. Plant fibers break down, skins wear over time, and repeated use can alter their structure. In a setting where materials are not replaced regularly, their ability to insulate may decrease gradually. This process is not sudden, it unfolds over time, often without a clear moment when the material stops being effective. Instead, its performance shifts, and the body adjusts accordingly. A layer that once provided noticeable separation from the ground may become less effective, leading to more direct contact and a greater exchange of heat. The body responds through small changes in posture and movement, but these responses do not restore the original condition. They operate within the limits of what the material can still provide. The absence of a blanket, in this context, reflects not only the challenge of carrying materials, but also the challenge of keeping them in a stable, effective state. A blanket, as it is understood today, depends on materials that can be maintained over long periods with relatively little change. It remains soft, structured, and capable of trapping air even after repeated use. Without such materials, the body relies on coverings that may change from one night to the next, both in availability and in condition. This creates a form of rest that is shaped by gradual shifts rather than consistent stability. The body does not encounter the same level of insulation each night. It encounters a range of conditions, each one influenced by the state of the materials and the environment in which they are used. Across much of human history, this would have meant that warmth during sleep was not a fixed resource. It was something that depended on what had been carried, how it had been used, and how it had changed over time. The body remained at the center of this system, adjusting as needed, but always within the limits set by materials that were part of a broader cycle of use and change. Movement also changes how quickly a sleeping space can be created at the end of the day. When a place is used repeatedly, there is time to shape it, to adjust the surface, to gather materials and arrange them with care. Over time, these efforts can build a more stable environment, one that reduces contact with the ground and slows the loss of warmth. But when a group arrives in a new location, especially after a long period of travel, the conditions are different. There is less time, less familiarity with the immediate surroundings, and fewer prepared materials already in place. The body must rest within what can be arranged in a limited period, using what is available nearby. This introduces another form of variability. The quality of the sleeping surface depends not only on what is carried, but on what can be found and prepared before night fully settles. In some places, suitable materials may be easy to gather. In others, they may be sparse, scattered, or less effective. The arrangement itself may be simple, not because of a lack of knowledge, but because of the time and energy available at that moment. After a day of movement, the body is already using its energy for recovery, and the effort required to build a more insulated space may compete with the need to rest. This balance shapes how much preparation can take place. The result is not a fixed system, but a flexible one, where each night's conditions depend on immediate circumstances rather than a stable, repeated setup. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans often adapted their resting places using local materials, but it also indicates that these preparations varied in complexity. Some sites show signs of repeated use and layered materials, while others appear more temporary, with fewer modifications to the ground. This variation reflects differences in how long a place was used and how much effort could be invested in preparing it. In a mobile context, many sleeping areas would have been used briefly, with materials gathered and arranged for a single night or a short period before being left behind. This means that the insulating properties of these arrangements were not only variable, but also temporary. A surface that provided some separation from the ground one night might not exist in the same form the next. The body adapts within this changing pattern, but it does not rely on a consistent level of insulation. The absence of a blanket becomes clearer within this framework. A blanket represents continuity. It can be used in the same way regardless of location, creating a familiar and stable condition for rest. Without such an object, warmth depends on a combination of what is carried and what is immediately available. This combination changes with each new location, each day of movement, and each set of environmental conditions. The body remains at the center of this system, responding to the level of insulation that can be created in that moment, rather than expecting a fixed layer that holds warmth in place. Across much of human history, this would have created a form of rest that was closely tied to the rhythm of movement and settlement. Nights were not identical in their conditions. They varied with the landscape, with the materials that could be gathered, and with the time available to arrange them. The body moved through these variations, adjusting as needed, but always within a system where warmth was shaped by immediacy rather than consistency. In this sense, the absence of a blanket is not only about what was not carried, it is about how each night's environment had to be created again, within limits that changed from place to place, leaving the body to adapt within those limits as it settled into rest. When bodies rest close to one another, warmth does not remain isolated within a single individual. It begins to overlap, creating a shared space in which heat is held more effectively than it would be alone. Each body produces its own warmth, but when that warmth meets another nearby, the movement of heat outward can slow. The air between them becomes slightly warmer, and the difference between body and environment is reduced. This does not eliminate the loss of heat, but it changes its pattern. Instead of moving directly from a single body into the surrounding air and ground, some of that warmth is exchanged within the group, circulating in a smaller space before gradually dispersing outward. This effect depends on proximity. The closer the bodies are, the more noticeable the shared warmth becomes. When contact is direct, the exchange is even more immediate. Heat moves from one body to another, and areas that would otherwise cool more quickly may retain warmth for longer. This is not a strategy that requires conscious planning in every instance. It reflects a basic physical process in which heat moves along gradients. flowing from warmer areas to cooler ones. When multiple bodies are present, those gradients are shaped differently, and the overall loss of heat can be reduced. In modern conditions, this effect is often less noticeable because individual insulation is already high. A blanket creates a stable layer that holds warmth around each person, reducing the need for shared heat. But without such insulation, the presence of others becomes more significant. The body is no longer surrounded by a fixed layer that traps warm air. Instead, it exists within a space where warmth can be influenced by nearby bodies, by their position, and by how closely they rest together. Archaeological and anthropological observations suggest that group living has been a consistent feature of human societies. While the exact arrangements of sleep are not always preserved in detail, the presence of shared spaces and the social nature of human groups indicate that proximity during rest was likely common in many contexts. This does not imply a single pattern or arrangement. The way people position themselves would have varied depending on environment, social structure, and available space. However, the potential for shared warmth would have been present wherever bodies rested near one another. The absence of a blanket makes this shared effect more visible. Without a layer that holds warmth individually, the body becomes more responsive to the presence of others. The space between bodies becomes part of the thermal environment, holding warmth more effectively than open air. At the same time, this shared warmth is not uniform. Areas in direct contact may remain warmer, while parts of the body that are more exposed continue to lose heat. This creates a pattern in which warmth is distributed unevenly across the group, shaped by position and movement. The body adjusts within this pattern, turning, shifting, and repositioning in ways that influence both individual and shared warmth. Over the course of the night, these small adjustments can change how heat is distributed, creating a dynamic system in which warmth is both shared and lost at the same time. This does not suggest that shared sleep fully replaces the function of a blanket. It does not create a stable, enclosed layer that holds warmth consistently around each body. Instead, it provides a partial effect, one that reduces heat loss in certain areas while leaving others exposed. The body remains part of a broader system, interacting not only with the ground and the air, but also with the presence of others. Across much of human history, this interaction would have been a regular part of rest. It reflects a way of maintaining warmth that depends on proximity and shared space, rather than on a fixed individual covering. The absence of a blanket, in this context, highlights how warmth could be supported by the group, even as it continued to move outward into the environment, shaping the experience of rest as something both individual and collective. When several bodies rest together, the space between them becomes part of how warmth is managed, but that space is not fixed. It changes as each person shifts position, even slightly, over the course of the night. A small movement from one individual can alter how heat is distributed across the group, opening gaps in some areas while bringing surfaces closer in others. This means that shared warmth is not constant. It forms and dissolves in response to movement, creating a pattern that is always adjusting rather than remaining stable. The body does not receive the same level of warmth throughout the entire night, even when others are nearby. It moves through areas of closer contact and areas of greater exposure, responding to these changes without conscious awareness. This pattern is similar to the way a single body adjusts to the ground, but it now includes the presence of others as part of the system. Warmth is not only lost to the environment, it is also exchanged within the group, redistributed as bodies move in relation to one another. The effectiveness of this shared warmth depends on how closely individuals are positioned. When bodies are arranged in a way that reduces open space, the air between them can remain warmer for longer. This slows the movement of heat outward, creating a small area where warmth is retained more effectively. But this arrangement is not always maintained. Over time, natural shifts in posture can create openings where cooler air enters, changing the balance again. The group does not function as a sealed environment. It remains open, influenced by the surrounding air and the ground beneath. The warmth that is shared is still subject to gradual loss, and the body continues to adjust within that process. In modern conditions, where individual insulation is common, the influence of shared warmth is often less noticeable. Each person carries their own layer that stabilizes temperature, reducing dependence on proximity to others. Without such layers, the presence of others becomes more significant, but it does not eliminate variability. It introduces another factor that changes over time: adding to the complexity of how warmth is experienced during sleep. Archaeological and anthropological research suggests that human groups have long lived and rested in close proximity, but the exact patterns of how they arrange themselves during sleep are not fully preserved. What can be observed is that shared spaces were common, and that these spaces would have allowed for some degree of heat exchange between individuals. The specific arrangements likely varied with environment, group size, and social structure. In colder conditions, closer arrangements may have been more beneficial, while in warmer conditions, more space may have been preferred. These variations reflect the adaptability of human behavior, but they also indicate that no single arrangement would have provided a consistent level of warmth across all situations. The absence of a blanket highlights this variability. Without a stable layer that holds warmth in place, the body depends more on changing factors, including the position of others. Warmth becomes something that is influenced by movement, not only individual movement, but the combined movement of the group. As each person shifts, the pattern of heat exchange changes, creating a dynamic environment in which warmth is shared, lost, and redistributed continuously. This does not create a uniform condition. It creates a fluctuating one, where the body remains engaged with both the environment and the group, adjusting to changes that unfold gradually over time. Even when bodies rest close together, the warmth that forms between them does not create a complete enclosure. It remains open at the edges, shaped by the surrounding air and by the surfaces beneath. The space shared between individuals can slow the movement of heat, but it does not fully contain it. Air continues to move in and out of that space, carrying warmth away and replacing it with cooler air over time. This means that shared warmth is always partial. It reduces the rate at which heat is lost, but it does not stop the process. The body remains connected to the wider environment, even when it is not alone. This connection becomes more noticeable in areas that are not in direct contact with others. A shoulder that is turned outward, a leg that extends slightly beyond the group, or the upper surface of the body exposed to air can still lose heat steadily. The presence of others does not create a uniform layer around each individual. Instead, it creates a pattern in which some areas are more protected, while others remain exposed. Over time, the body responds to this unevenness. Small shifts occur, bringing exposed areas closer to the group and moving previously covered areas outward. These adjustments help redistribute warmth, but they do not create a stable condition that remains unchanged. The pattern continues to shift as each individual moves, creating a system in which warmth is constantly being shared, altered, and lost. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that shared living spaces were common, but they do not indicate that these spaces functioned as enclosed thermal systems. Structures may have provided some protection from wind or retained a portion of warmth, but they did not always create a fully sealed environment. Openings, variations in construction, and the natural movement of air would have allowed heat to move beyond the immediate space. This reinforces the idea that shared warmth operated within an open system rather than a closed one. The body, even within a group, remained part of that system, interacting with both the presence of others and the broader environment at the same time. In modern settings, a blanket creates a different condition. It forms a boundary that reduces the movement of air and holds warmth close to the body in a more uniform way. This boundary remains relatively stable, even as the body moves. Without such a boundary, shared warmth does not have the same continuity. It forms through proximity, but it changes with movement and remains open to external influence. The absence of a blanket highlights this difference. It shows that while proximity to others can support warmth, it does not replace the function of a consistent insulating layer. The body continues to experience a balance that is influenced by multiple factors: the position of others, the movement of air, the contact with the ground, and the gradual changes in temperature throughout the night. Across much of human history, this would have created a form of rest in which warmth was both shared and limited. The body did not rely on a single, stable source of insulation. It relied on a combination of internal processes, available materials, and the presence of others. Each of these contributed to maintaining warmth, but none of them provided a complete solution on their own. The result is a pattern in which rest unfolds within an environment that remains open and changing, where warmth is never fully enclosed, and where the body continues to adjust quietly as it moves through the night alongside others, sharing heat without ever fully containing it. The ground beneath a sleeping place does not remain unchanged from one night to the next. Over time, repeated use can alter its surface, creating layers that reflect past moments of rest. These layers may include compacted soil, traces of plant material, or residues from fire, each contributing to how the surface interacts with the body. Archaeological findings in some locations suggest that people return to the same resting areas, gradually shaping them through continued use. As materials were added and compressed, the surface could become more even, slightly softer, and in some cases more capable of reducing direct contact with the colder layers below. This does not create a fully insulating barrier, but it changes the way heat moves between the body and the ground. A surface that has been prepared and used repeatedly may slow the loss of warmth compared to bare earth, even if it does not stop it entirely. The presence of such surfaces indicates that people interacted with their environment in ways that could influence comfort and rest, but these interactions did not always result in a consistent or enclosed system. The materials used to shape these surfaces were often organic, and their properties could change over time. Plant matter may compress and lose its structure, reducing the air spaces that help slow the movement of heat. Ash from a fire may create a different texture, but it does not function as a stable, insulating layer on its own. Soil itself can shift with moisture and use, becoming harder or more compacted, which can increase direct contact with the body. These changes mean that even a prepared surface is not fixed. It evolves with use, and its ability to influence warmth can increase or decrease depending on its condition. Across different environments, the types of materials available for preparing a sleeping surface would have varied. In some areas, grasses or leaves may have been abundant, allowing for thicker layers. In others, such materials may have been limited, resulting in thinner or more temporary arrangements. This variability suggests that the insulating effect of prepared surfaces was not uniform. It depended on local conditions, on how often a place was used, and on how materials were gathered and arranged. Archaeological evidence provides glimpses of these practices, but it does not indicate that they created a consistent solution comparable to a blanket. Instead, it shows that people adapted their surroundings in ways that could reduce exposure, while still remaining within an open system where heat continued to move outward. The absence of a blanket becomes clearer when we consider the difference between shaping a surface and enclosing the body. Preparing the ground can change how heat is lost through contact, but it does not address the loss of heat into the air above. It improves one part of the system while leaving another largely unchanged. As a result, the body still experiences a gradual loss of warmth, even when resting on a prepared surface. The body's responses continue to play a role, adjusting posture and contact to manage the ongoing exchange. This suggests that while the preparation of sleeping areas could influence comfort, it did not create a stable, self-contained environment for warmth. Instead, it modified the conditions within which the body operated, offering partial support rather than complete insulation. Over long periods of time, these prepared surfaces would have become familiar elements of certain places, reflecting repeated use and adaptation. But their presence does not imply that warmth was fully controlled. It remained something that had to be managed within the limits of available materials and environmental conditions. The body continued to interact with both the ground and the air, adjusting as needed, while the prepared surface beneath it contributed to that balance without replacing the need for a layer that could hold warmth close on all sides. As a resting place is used again and again, its surface begins to reflect the accumulation of small changes rather than a single, intentional design. Each night leaves a trace. Even if it is not visible in a clear or lasting way, plant materials may be added and then pressed down by the weight of the body. Ash from a fire may settle into the ground, mixing with soil and creating a layer that differs slightly from what came before. Over time, these elements combine, forming a surface that is shaped by repeated use rather than by a fixed plan. This surface can influence how the body experiences contact with the ground, but it does so gradually and unevenly. Some areas may become more compacted, offering less cushioning and allowing more direct transfer of heat. Other areas may retain a small amount of structure, holding air within their layers and slowing the movement of warmth. The result is not a uniform surface, but one that varies across small distances, creating differences in how the body loses heat from one point to another. The body responds to these differences without conscious awareness. Areas that cool more quickly may lead to small adjustments in position, shifting weight to a slightly different part of the surface. These movements do not reshape the surface in a deliberate way, but over time they contribute to its ongoing transformation. The ground becomes a record of interaction, shaped by the combined effect of many nights rather than by a single arrangement. Archaeological studies of ancient living sites have revealed evidence of such repeated use, where layers of organic material, ash, and soil indicate that certain areas were returned to and modified over time. These findings suggest that people did not simply lie down on untouched ground each night. They interacted with their environment, altering it in ways that could influence comfort and stability. However, these alterations did not create a fully controlled or enclosed system. They remained part of an open environment where the movement of heat continued through both contact with the ground and exposure to the air. The effectiveness of these surfaces as a form of insulation would have depended on their condition at any given time. A surface that had been recently prepared with fresh materials may have provided more separation from the ground, while one that had been used repeatedly without renewal may have become more compacted and less effective. Moisture could also influence this process, changing the structure of organic materials and affecting how they interact with heat. These factors introduce variability, making it difficult for the body to rely on a consistent level of insulation from the ground alone. The absence of a blanket highlights the limits of this approach. Preparing a surface can reduce the loss of heat through direct contact, but it does not address the loss of heat into the surrounding air. It creates a partial solution, one that improves one pathway of heat transfer while leaving another largely unchanged. The body remains exposed above, and the air continues to carry warmth away over time. This means that even with a prepared surface, the body must continue to adjust, responding to changes in temperature through small movements and internal regulation. Across much of human history, this pattern of interaction between body and surface would have been a regular part of rest. The ground was not simply a passive element, it was shaped by use, and in turn, it shaped how warmth was experienced. But it did not replace the need for a stable, enclosing layer that could hold warmth consistently around the body. Instead, it contributed to a system in which warmth was managed through a combination of environmental modification and bodily response, each influencing the other over the course of the night. Over long periods of repeated use, a sleeping place can begin to carry a quiet sense of continuity, but that continuity does not mean stability in the way a blanket provides. The ground may become familiar, shaped by layers that have been added, compressed, and altered over time, yet each of those layers remains open to change. A surface that has been used many times might feel more even, slightly more responsive to the body, but it still exists within an environment that continues to shift. Moisture can enter and leave, materials can break down or be scattered, and the balance between softness and firmness can change from one night to the next. This means that even a place that appears consistent is not fixed in its ability to hold warmth. It offers a degree of continuity, but not a controlled condition that remains the same across time. The body, in turn, does not rely on that surface as a complete solution. It continues to respond through its own adjustments, shifting position, redistributing contact, and managing the ongoing exchange of heat. What becomes apparent in this process is that the ground, even when prepared and used repeatedly, does not function as a container for warmth. It can influence how heat is lost through contact, but it does not hold that heat in place. Warmth still moves outward, into the air above and into the deeper layers below, and the body remains part of that movement. Archaeological findings from sites with evidence of repeated occupation suggest that people returned to familiar places and modified them over time. But these modifications did not isolate the body from the environment. Instead, they reflect an ongoing interaction with it. Layers of ash, plant matter, and compacted soil indicate that surfaces were shaped, but they also show that these surfaces were part of a process rather than a finished structure. Each layer represents a moment of use, not a permanent solution. Over time, these layers accumulate, but they do not create a sealed boundary that prevents the loss of heat. The absence of a blanket becomes more distinct when we consider this difference between accumulation and enclosure. A blanket works by creating a stable layer that surrounds the body, trapping air and slowing the movement of heat in all directions. It provides a consistent condition that can be relied on night after night. A prepared surface, even one that has been used repeatedly, does not create this kind of enclosure. It affects the interaction between the body and the ground, but it leaves the rest of the system open. The body remains exposed above, and the air continues to carry warmth away. This creates a condition in which warmth is influenced by the surface, but not controlled by it. Across much of human history, this would have meant that even the most familiar resting places did not fully remove the need for the body to adapt. Each night, the body would encounter a surface shaped by past use, but also by present conditions. The temperature of the ground, the dryness of the materials, and the movement of air all contributed to how warmth was experienced. The body responded within this shifting context, not expecting a fixed level of insulation, but adjusting to what was available in that moment. The absence of a blanket, in this sense, reflects a broader pattern in which rest was integrated into an environment that remained active and changing. Warmth was not held in place by a single object. It was influenced by layers of interaction between body, ground, and air, each one contributing to a balance that had to be maintained rather than assumed. The appearance of woven materials marks a gradual change in how warmth could be managed, but it does not happen all at once, and it does not immediately create a condition comparable to a modern blanket. The ability to twist fibers into threads and interlace them into fabric reflects a development in skill and tools that emerges over time. Archaeological evidence shows that early forms of fiber use and weaving existed, but these materials were often limited in size, thickness, and durability. A simple woven surface can slow the movement of heat by holding small pockets of air, but its effectiveness depends on how tightly it is constructed and how many layers are used. Early textiles were not always thick or uniform. They may have been narrow, loosely structured, or subject to wear that reduced their ability to trap air. This means that even when woven materials were present, they did not necessarily function as a consistent insulating layer during sleep. The development of textiles is also closely tied to the availability of suitable fibers, such as plant materials or animal hair, and to the techniques used to process them. These processes require time, tools, and knowledge, and they do not produce identical results in every context. A fabric made from coarse fibers may allow more air to pass through, reducing its ability to hold warmth. A fabric that has been used repeatedly may become thinner or lose its structure, changing how it interacts with heat. These variations suggest that early textiles contributed to managing warmth, but they did so within a range of effectiveness that was not fixed. In addition to their physical properties, woven materials were often used for multiple purposes. A piece of fabric might serve as clothing, as a container, or as part of a shelter, depending on the needs of the moment. This means that its use during sleep was not always its primary function. The condition of the material at night would depend on how it had been used during the day, introducing further variability. If a textile had been exposed to moisture or repeated movement, its ability to insulate could be reduced. This reinforces the idea that the presence of a material does not guarantee its effectiveness as a stable covering. Archaeological findings from later periods provide clearer evidence of more advanced weaving techniques and larger pieces of fabric, but these developments appear gradually and are not uniform across all regions. The adoption of textile production depends on cultural, environmental, and technological factors that vary widely. In some areas, woven materials may have become more common and more effective over time. In others, their use may have remained limited or combined with other forms of insulation. This uneven development suggests that the transition toward more consistent coverings was not a single event, but a process that unfolded differently in different contexts. The absence of a blanket, when viewed across the full span of human history, reflects this gradual change. A blanket as a dedicated, reliable object requires not only the existence of suitable materials, but also the ability to produce them in a consistent form and to maintain them over time. Before these conditions were met, warmth during sleep would have depended on a combination of factors, including available materials, environmental conditions, and the body's own responses. Even when woven materials were introduced, they did not immediately create a fully enclosed system. They added another layer to the existing balance, slowing the loss of heat in some ways while leaving other pathways unchanged. The body remained connected to the ground and the air, adjusting as needed, while the materials available at the time contributed to that adjustment without replacing it entirely. As weaving techniques developed further, the structure of textiles began to change in ways that could influence how warmth was held. Threads could be arranged more tightly, layers could be combined, and the overall surface could become more continuous. These changes allowed fabrics to trap air more effectively, which is a key factor in slowing the movement of heat away from the body. However, this development did not happen uniformly or immediately across all regions. The ability to produce thicker, more consistent textiles depended on access to materials, the refinement of tools, and the accumulation of knowledge over time. In many contexts, early fabrics remained relatively thin, and even when multiple layers were used, they did not always create a fully enclosed space around the body. The presence of a textile layer could reduce the loss of heat into the air, but it did not necessarily address the loss of heat into the ground or the movement of air at the edges. This means that while textiles contributed to warmth, they did so within a system that remained partially open. The body could retain more heat than before, but not in a completely stable or uniform way. The condition of the textile itself also played an important role. A fabric that is newly made and well structured can trap air more effectively than one that has been used repeatedly. Over time, fibers can shift, loosen, or compress, reducing the small spaces that hold warmth. If the material becomes damp, its ability to insulate can decrease further, as moisture alters the way heat moves through it. These changes are gradual and may not be immediately noticeable, but they influence how effective the textile is over time. This suggests that even as weaving improved, the ability of fabrics to function as reliable, repeatable coverings depended on maintenance and context. The body, therefore, did not simply rely on the presence of a textile. It continued to respond to changes in the material's condition and in the surrounding environment. In addition to their physical properties, textiles were often integrated into broader systems of use. A woven piece might be worn during the day and used as a covering at night, or it might serve as part of a shelter or storage system. This flexibility means that the textile was not always preserved in a state optimized for holding warmth during sleep. Its condition at night would reflect its use throughout the day, introducing variability similar to that seen with other materials. Archaeological evidence from later periods shows an increase in the presence of woven goods, suggesting that textile production became more widespread and refined over time. However, this increase does not imply that all communities had equal access to thick, insulating fabrics. The distribution of materials and techniques varied, and the effectiveness of textiles as a source of warmth would have reflected these differences. In some contexts, textiles may have provided a noticeable improvement in comfort and heat retention. In others, their impact may have been more limited, especially if they remained thin or were used in combination with other materials. The absence of a blanket, understood as a consistent and dedicated covering, remains significant within this gradual development. A blanket requires not only a suitable textile, but also a level of production and maintenance that allows it to function reliably over time. Before such conditions became common, textiles contributed to warmth without fully replacing the need for the body to adapt. The body continued to adjust its position, manage its internal processes, and interact with the environment, even as materials became more capable of slowing the loss of heat. Warmth, in this context, was increasingly supported by external layers, but it was not yet fully contained by them. As textiles became more refined and more widely used, the way the body experienced warmth during rest began to shift. But this shift did not occur as a single, clear transition. It unfolded gradually, shaped by differences in environment, access to materials, and the ways in which those materials were integrated into daily life. In some contexts, thicker fabrics or multiple layers may have allowed the body to retain warmth more effectively, reducing the need for constant adjustment during the night. In others, textiles may have remained limited in size or density, offering only partial insulation that changed with use and condition. This uneven development means that the presence of woven materials does not mark a single point at which warmth became stable or fully controlled. Instead, it represents a stage in a longer process in which external layers began to play a more consistent role, while still operating within an open system where heat could move outward. Even when fabrics improved, they did not always create a fully enclosed space around the body. Gaps remained at the edges, and the ground beneath continued to draw heat through contact. The air above was still free to move, carrying warmth away over time. A textile layer could slow these processes, but it could not always prevent them entirely. This means that the body continued to rely on its internal responses, even as external materials became more effective. Blood flow, posture, and small movements remained part of how warmth was maintained, working alongside the growing presence of textiles rather than being replaced by them. The relationship between body and material became more balanced, but not completely stable. The idea of a blanket, as a dedicated object designed to hold warmth consistently around the body, depends on a combination of factors that extend beyond the existence of fabric alone. It requires materials that are sufficiently thick and structured, the ability to produce them in a reliable way, and the practice of reserving them specifically for rest. These conditions emerge over time and are not present in all contexts simultaneously. Archaeological and historical evidence suggests that more complex textile traditions developed in certain regions, leading to the production of larger and more consistent coverings. However, this development is uneven, influenced by local resources, technologies, and cultural practices. In many cases, textiles continued to serve multiple roles, and their use during sleep remained part of a broader system rather than a specialized function. This means that even as the potential for blanket-like coverings increased, their consistent use as such was not universal. The absence of a blanket, when viewed across the full span of human history, reflects the time it takes for these conditions to align. It is not simply about the lack of material, but about the lack of a system that produces, maintains, and dedicates that material to a single purpose. Before that system becomes stable, warmth during sleep remains influenced by variability in both materials and environment. The body continues to adapt within this variability, responding to changes in temperature and to the condition of the materials available at the time. Across generations, this gradual shift would have altered how rest was experienced, but it did not remove the underlying processes that shape the movement of heat. Even with improved textiles, warmth is still something that must be managed, not assumed. The body remains part of a system in which heat is produced, lost, and partially retained, guided by both internal processes and external layers that become more effective over time without fully enclosing the experience of rest. Today, warmth during sleep often feels less like a condition we create and more like a background expectation. A room is closed, layers are already prepared, and the body enters rest inside an environment that has been arranged in advance to reduce disturbance. Because of this, the moment of slight cooling that appears before sleep is usually brief. The body notices it, but the surrounding materials respond almost immediately. A blanket holds warmth close, the bed reduces contact with the colder surface below, and the air around the body becomes part of a small, controlled space. Over time, this arrangement changes what comfort feels like. The body still carries the older mechanisms of heat regulation, but it depends less visibly on them. Warmth appears to be present by default, even though it is still being created and preserved through layers that have been built around the body. This changes not only the physical experience of sleep, but also the expectation of what sleep should feel like. Rest begins to seem incomplete if warmth is not stable, even though for much of human history stability of that kind may not have been available in the same way. This does not mean that modern comfort is unnatural or excessive. It means that it is historically specific. It reflects a long process in which materials, shelter, and daily habits have gradually reduced the body's direct exposure to the night environment. As that exposure decreases, the body's small adjustments become less noticeable. We still turn during sleep, pull warmth closer, and respond to subtle changes, but these actions take place inside a setting that already protects us from larger shifts. The result is a different relationship between the body and the night. The night is no longer something the body remains openly within. It is something filtered through walls, surfaces, fabrics, and controlled indoor air. The contrast matters because it changes how we interpret discomfort. A slightly cold foot, a brief sense of cooling at the shoulder, or the need to curl inward. Yet these responses belong to a deeper pattern in the body, one that formed long before warmth during sleep became stable and expected. In that older pattern, the body did not assume that the environment would remain constant. It adjusted within variation. It responded to the ground, to the air, to nearby bodies, to the fading of fire, and to the limits of whatever materials were available. Sleep was not separate from those conditions. It unfolded inside them. Modern expectations often reverse that relationship. We begin with the idea that sleep should be insulated even, and thermally quiet, and only notice the environment when something interrupts that quiet. This difference in expectation can make the past seem harsher than it necessarily was, simply because we are measuring it against conditions that are highly controlled. Archaeological and historical evidence shows gradual changes in shelter, bedding, and textile use, but it does not suggest a single universal standard of comfort. What it reveals instead is a wide range of ways humans shape their sleeping environments, each one limited by material, climate, and habit. Our current sense of comfort comes from living inside the later end of that process. We inherit a world in which warmth can be stored, repeated, and expected night after night. The body, however, still carries traces of a longer history. It still curls inward when warmth drops. It still protects the center before the edges. It still responds to the night as if warmth were something that must be maintained rather than assumed. In this way, modern comfort does not erase the older human experience. It covers it, softens it, and makes it easier to forget. But the body has not entirely forgotten, and small moments of coolness before sleep still reveal how recent our thermal certainty may be. When warmth becomes something that is consistently available, the body begins to treat it as a condition that should not change. This expectation does not form through a single decision. It develops gradually, through repeated nights in which the environment remains stable enough that the body no longer needs to adjust in the same way. Over time, the small movements that once helped manage cooling become less central to the experience of rest. The body still carries out these adjustments, but they are softer, less noticeable, and often unnecessary for maintaining comfort. As a result, stillness begins to feel more complete. Sleep appears smoother, more continuous, less shaped by interaction with the surrounding temperature. This change influences not only how the body feels during the night, but also how it interprets even minor variations. A slight difference in temperature that would once have been absorbed as part of the night's gradual change can now stand out more clearly. The body notices it earlier, and the mind may interpret it as something that needs to be corrected. This does not reflect a loss of ability to adapt. It reflects a shift in expectation. The body has learned, through repetition, that warmth can be maintained with less effort, and it responds accordingly when that expectation is not met. In modern environments, the tools used to maintain warmth are designed to create consistency. Materials trap air in stable layers, surfaces reduce direct contact with cooler ground, and enclosed spaces limit the movement of air. These conditions reduce variability, allowing the body to remain in a narrower range of temperature throughout the night. Because this range is consistent, it becomes familiar. The body adjusts to it, and over time, it begins to treat it as a baseline rather than as a specific arrangement that must be created. This baseline changes how the body responds when it is no longer present. Without a stable insulating layer, the body may encounter the same gradual cooling that it once managed regularly. But now, that cooling is less familiar. The body still responds through posture and internal regulation, but the experience feels different because it is measured against a more stable expectation. Archaeological and historical evidence suggests that the development of more controlled sleeping environments occurred gradually, with changes in shelter, materials, and daily habits contributing over time. These changes did not create a single universal standard of warmth, but they did allow for greater consistency in many contexts. As that consistency increased, the body's relationship with temperature shifted. It became less about adapting to variation and more about maintaining a steady condition. The absence of a blanket, in this context, reveals the difference between these two patterns. In one pattern, warmth is variable and managed through ongoing adjustment. In the other, warmth is stabilized and maintained with minimal effort. The body can function in both conditions, but it experiences them differently. In a variable environment, small changes in temperature are part of the background of sleep. In a stable environment, those same changes can feel more pronounced, not because they are larger, but because they differ from what the body has come to expect. This difference highlights how much of modern comfort depends on repetition. The same conditions are recreated night after night, allowing the body to settle into a predictable pattern. Without that repetition, the body returns to a more dynamic form of rest, one in which warmth is not held in a fixed state, but moves gradually, and the body adjusts within that movement. This does not mean that one pattern is better than the other. It means that they reflect different relationships between the body and its environment, shaped by the conditions in which sleep takes place. As modern sleeping environments become more controlled, the idea of comfort gradually shifts from something negotiated to something assumed. The room is expected to remain calm, the surface beneath the body is expected to stay even, and warmth is expected to gather around the body without effort. These expectations feel natural because they are repeated so often. Night after night, the same arrangement returns. The body lies down into a familiar system of insulation, and rest begins within conditions that are already prepared. Over time, this repetition changes the emotional texture of sleep as well. Warmth no longer feels like something fragile or temporary. It feels dependable. Because of that, the body can settle more quickly, and the mind often reads thermal stability as part of what safety feels like. This does not come only from biology. It also comes from habit, from living inside environments where the temperature of sleep has been made predictable. In that sense, modern comfort is not just a set of materials. It is a learned atmosphere. It teaches the body what to expect from the night, and once that expectation is in place, even small deviations can feel larger than they are. A cooler edge of the bed, a shoulder briefly uncovered, or a room that loses warmth too quickly can interrupt the feeling of ease, not necessarily because the body is in danger, but because the pattern it has come to trust is no longer complete. This helps explain why the absence of a blanket can feel so immediate in the present. It is not only the loss of warmth itself, it is the loss of continuity. The body is returned, even if only slightly, to a more open relationship with the environment. It must begin adjusting again. It must notice airflow, contact, and the changing distribution of heat across the skin. These are not new abilities. They are older ones, still present beneath modern habits. But because they are used less directly, they can feel unfamiliar when they return to the foreground. Across much of human history, that foreground may have looked very different. Sleep likely did not begin inside a perfectly stable thermal boundary. It began within conditions that changed gradually, and the body entered rest while remaining connected to those changes. Archaeological and historical evidence points to many efforts to shape sleeping environments through shelter, bedding, fire, textile use, and shared space, but these efforts seem to have reduced exposure by degree rather than removing it entirely. The body therefore would have rested within a field of variation rather than within full thermal certainty. This does not mean that the past was defined by constant discomfort. It means that comfort itself may have been experienced differently, less as a fixed envelope around the body, and more as a balance that the body maintained through subtle response. In modern life, the expectation of comfort can make it easy to forget that warmth is still a process. Heat is still being produced, lost, trapped, and redistributed every night. The blanket does not create warmth from nothing. It slows the movement of warmth that the body is already making. The bed does not erase the ground. It inserts a barrier between body and surface. The room does not remove the night. It filters it. Seen this way, modern comfort is not the opposite of older human sleep. It is a later layer placed over the same physical realities. The body still curls, still protects its center, still seeks stability in the dark. What has changed is how much the environment now does on its behalf. And perhaps that is why a simple blanket can feel so ordinary now. It has become part of the background. Yet when we step back far enough, it begins to look less like a basic human constant and more like a relatively recent answer to a much older condition. A body entering the night, carrying its warmth from within, while the world around it slowly asks for that warmth back. If we step back from individual nights and look across a longer span of time, a different picture of rest begins to form. It is not centered on a single object or a single solution, but on a pattern that repeats with variation. The body lies down, warmth begins to move outward, and the environment receives it. Sometimes that movement is slowed by materials, by proximity to others, or by the presence of fire. Sometimes it is shaped more directly by the ground and the air. But in each case, the process itself remains. Warmth is not held in place without effort. It is produced, shared, reduced, and maintained within limits that shift from one context to another. The absence of a blanket, when seen in this wider view, is not simply a gap waiting to be filled. It is part of a longer condition in which the body and environment remain connected during rest. This connection does not disappear as materials improve. It becomes less visible, less immediate, but it continues to exist beneath the layers that have been added over time. The body still generates heat, still loses it, still adjusts in response. What changes is how much of that process is handled internally and how much is supported externally. Over many generations, small changes in materials, shelter, and daily habits have gradually shifted this balance. Textiles have become more consistent, sleeping surfaces more stable, and enclosed spaces more common. Each of these developments reduces the direct influence of the environment, allowing the body to remain within a narrower range of conditions during sleep, but none of them remove the underlying exchange of heat. They alter its pace, its visibility, and its effect, but the process itself remains present. This suggests that the question is not only why blankets were absent for much of human history, but how the body functioned within that absence. The evidence points to a system of adaptation rather than a single solution. The body used its internal mechanisms, adjusted its position, responded to the presence of others, and interacted with materials that were available at the time. None of these elements provided complete insulation on their own. Together, they created a balance that allowed rest to occur within an environment that remained open and changing. Archaeological findings, environmental studies, and biological understanding all support this view, not by offering a single unified answer, but by showing how different pieces fit together. Surfaces were prepared but not sealed. Fires were used but not constant. Materials were gathered but not always stable. The body remained central, responding to each of these elements in ways that did not eliminate the movement of heat, but worked within it. In this sense, the absence of a blanket does not point to a lack of knowledge or a missing step in development. It reflects the conditions in which people lived, conditions where warmth was managed through a combination of factors rather than contained by a single object. As we move toward the end of this exploration, the pattern becomes clearer. The body does not need a perfectly stable environment to rest. It needs a range within which it can maintain balance. That range has shifted over time, becoming narrower and more controlled in many modern contexts, but the capacity to adjust within variation has not disappeared. It remains part of how the body functions, even when the environment is more stable. The presence of a blanket changes the experience of warmth, but it does not create warmth from nothing. It slows a process that has always been there, and without it, the body returns to a form of rest that is more directly connected to the environment, where warmth is not assumed, but continuously maintained within a system that has existed for far longer than any single material designed to hold it in place. Seen from the present, it is easy to imagine the blanket as a basic requirement of sleep, almost as if rest begins only after warmth has been enclosed and protected. But across most of human history, that enclosure was not the starting point. Rest often began before the environment had been fully separated from the body, and the body entered sleep while remaining exposed, in varying degrees, to air, ground, season, and the condition of whatever materials were available. This does not mean that warmth was absent in an absolute sense. It means that warmth was less often secured in a stable and repeatable form. The body did not wait for perfect insulation before resting. It rested within a world where insulation was partial, uneven, and dependent on context. That difference matters, because it changes how we understand both the past and the body itself. The body was not failing because it needed warmth. It was doing what it has always done, producing heat, losing heat, and adjusting in response to the rate of that loss. What changes across history is not the basic physics of that process, but the environment built around it. A blanket is one expression of that built environment. It gathers the body's own warmth and slows its escape. But long before such a solution became common, the body worked within more open conditions, using posture, shared heat, fire, prepared surfaces, and available coverings as partial supports rather than complete barriers. When these supports are viewed together, a pattern appears. Human rest was not based on a single invention that solved the problem of night. It was based on many small ways of reducing exposure without eliminating it. Shelter could cut wind, fire could warm one side of the body, plant matter could soften the ground and slightly reduce contact, Animal skins or woven materials could sometimes slow the loss of heat. Nearby bodies could create a warmer pocket of air. None of these, by themselves, fully enclosed the sleeper in the way a modern blanket often does, but together they could shift the balance enough for rest to continue. This helps explain why the title should not be treated as a rigid conclusion. To say that most of human history slept without a blanket is not to say that no one ever used coverings, or that every night was equally cold, or that the body simply endured discomfort without adaptation. It is to say something narrower and more historically grounded, that the dedicated, stable, blanket-like system many people now treat as ordinary was not a constant feature across the full span of human life. For a long time, warmth at night depended less on a single enclosing object and more on a changing combination of body, place, material, and habit. Archaeology supports this broader view not by preserving blankets in a complete and continuous record, but by showing traces of sleeping surfaces, fire use, textile development, hide processing, and repeated occupation of certain places. Biology supports it by showing that the human body regulates heat actively, but within limits, especially during sleep. Environmental evidence supports it by showing that nights differ across landscapes and seasons, and that the body's experience of temperature cannot be reduced to one universal setting. Together, these forms of evidence do not produce a dramatic revelation. They produce something quieter and more useful, a realistic picture of how human rest likely operated under changing conditions. And perhaps that is the deeper value of the question. It reminds us that comfort is historical, not timeless. It reminds us that the body we carry into bed each night is older than the materials surrounding it. And it suggests that what feels ordinary now may actually be a very recent arrangement placed over a much longer human story, one in which sleep was never fully separated from the slow, patient work of staying warm. In the end, the question is not whether humans somehow forgot to invent comfort, or whether the past was defined by a simple lack. It is quieter than that, and in some ways more revealing. For most of human history, sleep appears to have taken place inside a world that remained physically present to the body. The ground continued to draw heat, the air continued to move. Fire, when available, warmed only partly and unevenly. Materials that could soften or cover the body existed at times, but not always in forms that were stable, thick, dry, or reserved only for sleep. The body met these conditions not with perfect control, but with adjustment. It curled, shifted, conserved heat at the center, shared warmth when others were near, and rested within a range rather than inside a sealed layer of certainty. That may be the most useful way to understand the long human story behind a blanket. A blanket is not merely a soft object placed over the body. It is a technology of thermal stability. It gathers the warmth the body is already making and slows its escape. It turns an open night into a smaller, more predictable space. And because that space is now common, it is easy to mistake it for something timeless. But history suggests otherwise. What feels basic to us may be relatively recent in its full, stable form. The deeper continuity is not the blanket. It is the body itself, still carrying an older logic beneath modern comfort. It still protects the center first. It still responds to exposed skin. It still searches for reduced contact and more stable warmth. In that sense, the body has preserved a memory that culture slowly softened. This does not mean we should romanticize the past or treat discomfort as more authentic than comfort. It means we should see human life more clearly. Much of what now feels natural is actually built. Much of what feels missing in a colder room is not weakness, but the reappearance of an older physical relationship between body and environment. There is value in recognizing that. It makes ordinary things visible again: a blanket, a bed, a closed room, a layered sleeping surface, a night protected from moving air. These are not trivial luxuries when viewed across deep time. They are part of a long human effort to reduce exposure, to make rest more stable, and to move sleep gradually away from the raw conditions in which it once unfolded. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson hidden inside this subject. Human beings have always lived between biology and invention. The body sets the terms, but culture slowly changes the conditions. We do not escape the night completely. We learn, generation by generation, how to soften its reach. So when you pull a blanket closer and feel the body settle, you are not performing an unchanging ritual from the beginning of time. You are taking part in a very long history of small solutions to an old problem. How to let a warm, vulnerable body rest in a world that is always, patiently, trying to cool it. And if that is true, then perhaps the final question is not only why so much of human history slept without a blanket, but what other parts of our lives still feel timeless only because we have forgotten how recently they were built.